Ryan Mercer stood frozen in the elevator of Chicago's most expensive restaurant, gripping his daughter's hand while calculating exactly how many rent payments this one dinner would cost him. The doors opened to reveal crystal chandeliers and men in suits worth more than his truck. He'd promised his late wife he'd bring Chloe here someday. What he didn't know was that the woman about to walk through those same doors had come to sign away her entire billion-dollar empire, and that their collision would unravel both their lives in ways neither could survive alone. If you want to see how a single father's desperate promise and a billionaire's final night collide into something neither expected, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels.
Dark Hermione's.
The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt like ascending into another world Ryan Mercer had no business entering. His palms were sweating inside the cheap dress gloves he'd bought that morning at a department store closeout. Beside him, 8-year-old Chloe pressed her nose against the glass wall, watching Chicago shrink beneath them in a glittering sprawl of lights that seemed to go on forever. "Dad, are we really eating in the clouds?" she whispered. Ryan managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Close enough, sweetheart." The elevator chimed softly. The doors parted onto a scene that made Ryan's stomach drop in a way the rapid ascent hadn't. The restaurant stretched before them like something from a movie he couldn't afford to watch, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, tables draped in fabric that probably cost more than his monthly salary, waiters moving with the kind of silent precision that came from serving people who expected perfection. A massive chandelier dominated the center of the space, catching light and scattering it in ways that made everything shimmer. Ryan's worn suit suddenly felt like it was made of burlap. He'd borrowed it from his supervisor at the power plant, a man 3 inches shorter and 20 pounds lighter. The sleeves didn't quite reach his wrists. The shoulders pulled tight across his back every time he moved. He'd spent 2 hours that afternoon watching YouTube videos on how to tie a proper Windsor knot, and he still wasn't sure he'd gotten it right. "Reservation for Mercer," he told the hostess, a woman whose outfit probably cost more than his daughter's entire wardrobe. "Party of 2. She smiled with the kind of professional warmth that never touched her eyes and checked her tablet. For a horrible moment, Ryan thought she might tell him there'd been some mistake, that the reservation he'd made 3 months ago had vanished, that people like him weren't actually allowed in places like this. But she simply nodded and gestured for them to follow. They wove through tables where men and women sat in clothes Ryan couldn't even name, discussing things he barely understood. He caught fragments of conversation, stock portfolios, real estate acquisitions, a yacht someone was having custom built in Italy. One woman was complaining about her summer home in the Hamptons needing renovation. Another man was arguing about whether his daughter should attend Harvard or Yale. Ryan's hand tightened on Chloe's shoulder. She didn't seem to notice the stares, the way eyes followed them across the room, marking them as outsiders. She was too busy gazing at everything with the wonder of a child who still believed the world was full of magic. Their table was near the windows, which Ryan had specifically requested when making the reservation. Emma had always talked about eating somewhere you could see the whole city at once, somewhere that made you feel like you were floating above all the problems down below. She'd circled this restaurant in an old copy of Chicago magazine she'd found at the hospital where she worked. "Someday," she'd said, her finger tracing the pictures, "when we can afford it." That someday never came. Emma died 3 years ago when the hospital burned, trapped on the 4th floor while trying to evacuate patients. They'd found her body near the stairs, one hand still gripping a wheelchair. Ryan pulled out Chloe's chair, then his own. The menu arrived in leather folders that probably cost more than his work boots. He opened it and felt his throat go dry. He'd known it would be expensive. That's why he'd been saving for 9 months, skipping lunches, taking double shifts, fixing neighbors' appliances for cash on weekends. But seeing the numbers in print was different. The cheapest entree cost $80. A steak ran $200. "Dad, what's foie gras?" Chloe asked, struggling with the pronunciation. "Fancy food," Ryan said, scanning the menu for anything that might appeal to an 8-year-old. "How about the chicken or pasta? Can I get dessert?" Ryan looked at the dessert prices and did the math in his head. With tax and tip, this meal was going to cost him almost everything he'd saved. There'd be nothing left for Chloe's winter coat, which she desperately needed because last year's barely reached her wrists anymore. Nothing for the leak in the bathroom that was getting worse. Nothing for the stack of medical bills still sitting in his kitchen drawer, the ones with Emma's name that the collection agencies kept calling about. But he'd made a promise, to Emma, to himself, that Chloe would have at least one memory of something beautiful, something her mother had dreamed about. "Yeah, baby," he said, "you can get dessert." A waiter appeared at their table, moving with that same ghost-like silence. His name tag read Laurent, and his accent was French or something close to it. He took their drink order, water for both of them, with a subtle expression that Ryan couldn't quite read but felt like judgment. Around them, the restaurant hummed with muted wealth, quiet laughter from nearby tables, the gentle clink of expensive silverware on expensive plates. Someone was talking loudly about a merger that would revolutionize the industry. A woman at the next table was showing off an engagement ring that caught the light like a tiny sun. Ryan caught his reflection in the window and looked away quickly. His face was weathered from years working outdoors, his hands rough despite the gloves. There was a scar on his temple from when a piece of equipment had broken loose last winter, and his haircut was the result of Chloe's elementary school having a fundraiser where parents could get trimmed for $10. He looked exactly like what he was, a guy who fixed generators and went home smelling like diesel fuel and sweat. "Dad, that lady keeps looking at us," Chloe said quietly. Ryan followed her gaze to a table across the room where 3 women sat drinking wine that probably cost more per glass than Ryan made in a day. They were watching him and Chloe with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that looked like pity. One of them leaned over and whispered something to her companions. They all laughed. "Don't worry about it," Ryan said, reaching across to squeeze Chloe's hand. "We belong here as much as anyone." He wasn't sure he believed it, but Chloe nodded and went back to studying her menu, sounding out the French words with the serious concentration she brought to everything. The elevator chimed again across the restaurant. Ryan glanced up out of habit and then forgot how to breathe. The woman who stepped out shouldn't have existed outside of magazine covers or movie screens. She moved through the restaurant like she owned it, which Ryan would later learn she literally did. Tall and lean, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Ryan's truck, with dark hair pulled back in a way that somehow looked both effortless and impossibly precise. But it wasn't her looks that made everyone turn. It was something else, some quality of presence that made the entire room shift its attention like iron filings responding to a magnet. She swept past tables without acknowledging anyone, trailed by 2 men in expensive suits who were clearly trying to keep up with her pace. Ryan could see the hostess starting to move toward her, but the woman waved her off with a gesture that was both polite and absolute. "That's Scarlet Vale," someone at a nearby table whispered, loud enough for Ryan to hear. "Jesus, what's she doing here?" "I heard she's selling Vale Industries." "No way. That company's her whole life." "My friend's husband works in her legal department, says the papers are getting signed tonight." Ryan had heard the name before, though he couldn't place where. Someone famous, clearly. Someone who belonged in places like this. Scarlet Vale stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by tables full of people pretending not to stare while absolutely staring, and looked around like she was searching for something she'd lost. The 2 men behind her seemed confused. One of them leaned in and said something, but she shook her head. Then her eyes landed on Ryan and Chloe's table. For a moment that stretched too long, she just looked at them. At the empty 3rd chair Ryan had asked for and left untouched. At Chloe, who was still studying her menu with that intense focus. At Ryan himself, who felt suddenly exposed in a way he couldn't explain. Then Scarlet Vale started walking toward them. Ryan's mind went blank. He couldn't think of any reason why this woman, whoever she was, would be approaching their table. Maybe they'd broken some rule. Maybe children weren't actually allowed in the restaurant, and the hostess had made a mistake seating them. Maybe... "Excuse me," Scarlett said, and her voice was different from what Ryan had expected, softer, with something in it that sounded almost fragile. "I know this is strange, but would you mind if I sat here?" She gestured to the empty chair. Ryan stared at her. So did Chloe. Across the restaurant, conversations had stopped. The 2 men in suits looked like they'd been struck by lightning. "Miss Vale, we have your private table reserved," one of them said, the words tumbling out. The papers are ready to be— Cancel it, Scarlett said without looking at him. Her eyes stayed on Ryan. Please, I need to sit somewhere that doesn't feel like a funeral. Ryan glanced at Chloe, who looked back at him with the same confusion he felt. The logical thing would be to politely decline, to protect his daughter from whatever strange situation this clearly was. Rich people didn't just randomly ask to join regular people for dinner unless something was very wrong. But there was something in Scarlet Vale's expression that Ryan recognized, something he'd seen in his own mirror for the past 3 years. The look of someone barely holding themselves together. Sure, he heard himself say. If you want. One of the men in suits made a sound like he'd been punched. The other one was already pulling out his phone, clearly about to make very urgent calls to very important people. Scarlett sat down in the empty chair, Emma's chair, and for the first time since entering the restaurant, something in her face relaxed slightly. Thank you, she said quietly. You have no idea what this means. Ryan absolutely did not have any idea. He glanced around at the other tables where people had given up all pretense of not watching them. The 3 women from earlier looked stunned. A man in a suit that probably cost $5,000 had actually stood up slightly, like he was considering coming over. I'm Ryan, he said, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. This is my daughter, Chloe. Hi, Chloe said in a small voice, staring at Scarlett with wide eyes. Hi, Chloe. Scarlett's smile was brief but genuine. I'm Scarlett, and I promise I'm not as scary as everyone thinks I am. Are you famous? Chloe asked with the bluntness only children could pull off. Something like that, Scarlett said. She picked up the menu, though she didn't really seem to be reading it. Is this a special occasion? It's my birthday, Chloe announced. I'm 8 now. Well, I was 8 yesterday, but we're celebrating today because Dad had to work last night. Happy birthday, Scarlett said, and something shifted in her expression. Something that looked like pain. 8 is a good age. Ryan watched this stranger sitting in his late wife's chair, this woman whose presence had caused the entire restaurant to collectively hold its breath, and tried to understand what the hell was happening. One of the suit guys was standing at a distance now, phone pressed to his ear, shooting desperate glances in their direction every few seconds. Do you want to order? Ryan asked, because he had to say something and it was the only question his brain could produce. No, Scarlett said. I'm not hungry. I just wanted— She trailed off, looking out at the city lights beyond the window. Do you come here often? It should have been a normal question. Instead, it landed like an accusation, highlighting exactly how much Ryan didn't belong. First time, he admitted. Probably last time, too. This is way outside our usual budget. He immediately regretted the words. Rich people didn't want to hear about money problems. But Scarlett just nodded, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. My brother and I used to save up to come to places like this when we first moved to Chicago, she said. Before everything changed, we'd split one entree and pretend we weren't still hungry afterward. Ryan couldn't imagine this woman ever being hungry or broke or anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. But there was something genuine in the way she said it. Laurent returned with their waters and nearly dropped the tray when he saw who was sitting at the table. He recovered quickly, setting the glasses down with shaking hands, and looked at Scarlett like she might evaporate if he blinked. Miss Vale, he said, we have your private dining room prepared. If you'd like— I'm fine here, Scarlett said, not unkindly. Actually, I'd like the same thing they're having. We haven't ordered yet, Ryan said. Then I'll wait with you. Laurent looked between them, clearly trying to process this situation with absolutely no success. Finally, he just nodded and disappeared. The man with the phone had given up calling and was now approaching the table directly, his face arranged in an expression of professional panic that would have been funny under different circumstances. Miss Vale, he said, his voice tight. The board is waiting. Mr. Chen specifically said, tell Mr. Chen that I've changed my mind, Scarlett said, still not looking at him. You've changed your mind? About signing tonight, I need more time to think. The man's face went through several shades of pale. The contracts are finalized. Everyone is downstairs in the conference room. The press release is scheduled for 10 p.m. You can't just— I can do whatever I want, David, Scarlett said, and her voice shifted into something harder, something that made the man take an involuntary step back. It's still my company. Now please give me some space. David opened his mouth, closed it, then retreated with the kind of speed that suggested he knew better than to argue further. Ryan looked at Chloe, who was watching all of this like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. "What's a press release?" Chloe whispered. "I'll explain later," Ryan whispered back. Scarlett had gone back to staring out the window, her jaw tight. Up close, Ryan could see details he'd missed at first. The exhaustion around her eyes, the way her hands kept moving to touch her phone, then pulling away, the slight tremor in her fingers that suggested she was either furious or terrified or both. "I'm sorry," Ryan said. "I don't know what's going on, but if you need to go handle your business—" "No." The word came out sharp, almost desperate. Then Scarlett seemed to catch herself. "Sorry, no. I'm exactly where I need to be." It was the strangest thing Ryan had heard all night, and that was saying something. Laurent returned, now accompanied by what appeared to be the restaurant's manager, a thin man with perfectly styled gray hair who approached the table like he was defusing a bomb. "Miss Vale," he said smoothly, "what an unexpected pleasure. If we'd known you were coming, we would have prepared—" "I didn't want preparation," Scarlett cut him off. "I wanted normalcy." "Can I get that here, or should I go somewhere else?" The manager's smile flickered. "Of course. Whatever you wish." "Good. Then treat us exactly like you'd treat any other table." The manager and Laurent exchanged a glance that suggested this was absolutely not going to happen, but they both nodded and backed away. Ryan picked up his menu again, studying the prices and trying to figure out the cheapest possible combination that wouldn't make it obvious he was counting every dollar. Chloe had apparently decided Scarlett was interesting and had scooted her chair slightly closer. "Why is everyone acting so weird?" Chloe asked Scarlett directly. "Because people think I'm important," Scarlett said, "and they're not used to seeing important people do normal things." "Are you important?" "I used to think so. Now I'm not sure." "My dad is important," Chloe declared. "He fixes all the power at the big buildings downtown. When stuff breaks, people call him and he goes there even in the middle of the night." Something crossed Scarlett's face. Interest, maybe. Or recognition. "Is that right?" She looked at Ryan. "You're an engineer?" "Generator technician," Ryan corrected. "I keep the backup power running when the main systems fail. Hospitals, data centers, places that can't afford to go dark." "That sounds important to me." It was such a simple statement, but it landed differently coming from someone like her. Ryan found himself sitting up a little straighter despite himself. "It's honest work," he said. "Pays the bills?" "Mostly." Scarlett nodded slowly, like he'd said something profound. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its previous hum, though Ryan could still feel eyes drifting toward their table. "What about you?" Chloe asked. "What's your job?" "I built things," Scarlett said. "Created technology that helped people communicate better. Or that's what I told myself I was doing. Honestly, I'm not sure anymore if I was helping or just making money." "Did you make a lot of money?" "Chloe," Ryan said sharply, "that's rude." But Scarlett laughed, and it transformed her entire face. For just a second, she looked younger. Less like some untouchable billionaire and more like a regular person who'd forgotten how to be happy. "It's okay," she said. "Yeah, kiddo, I made a lot of money, more than anyone should probably have." "Then why do you look so sad?" Chloe asked, with the devastating honesty children wielded like weapons without realizing it. The laughter died. Scarlett's expression shuttered closed again, returning to something guarded. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Ryan was about to redirect the conversation when Scarlett finally spoke. "I lost someone," she said quietly. "Someone who was supposed to be here with me. And now everything feels wrong without them." Chloe nodded seriously. "Like my mom. She died when I was 5. Sometimes Dad puts her picture on the table when we eat at home, so it's like she's still there." Ryan felt his throat close up. He hadn't realized Chloe had noticed that. He'd thought he'd been subtle about it. Scarlett looked at the empty chair she was sitting in, and understanding washed across her face. "That's why there's 3 chairs. Dad promised Mom we'd eat here someday," Chloe continued, oblivious to the emotional grenade she'd just tossed onto the table. "She really wanted to come. She said it looked like heaven." Scarlett didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone rough. What happened to her? Ryan almost told her to mind her own business. It was the standard response he gave when strangers asked, the wall he threw up to avoid having to relive that night over and over. But something about the way Scarlett asked, like she actually wanted to know, like she understood what it meant to carry that kind of loss, made him answer honestly. Hospital fire, he said. 3 years ago. She was a nurse, got the patients out, didn't make it out herself. St. Catherine's, Scarlett said, and it wasn't a question. Ryan's head snapped up. How did you know? But Scarlett wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at her hands, her whole body gone rigid. The two men in suits were watching from across the room, clearly debating whether to approach again. Scarlett, Ryan prompted. My brother died 2 months after that fire, she said flatly. Cardiac arrest. He'd been waiting for specialized monitoring equipment that was supposed to arrive at the hospital 3 weeks earlier. But the company that manufactured it delayed the shipment because they wanted to prioritize more profitable markets first. By the time it arrived, it was too late. The words landed like stones. Ryan heard himself breathing but couldn't seem to find anything to say. The equipment was supposed to go to St. Catherine's, Scarlett continued, her voice frighteningly empty. If it had been there on time, if the hospital systems hadn't been destroyed in the fire, if any single thing had been different. She stopped, took a breath. Anyway, that's why I look sad, as your daughter so accurately pointed out. Chloe had gone quiet, sensing she'd stumbled into something bigger than she could understand. She reached out and put her small hand on Scarlett's arm. I'm sorry your brother died, she said seriously. I bet he was nice. Scarlett's eyes went bright, like she might cry, but she blinked it away and managed something that almost resembled a smile. He was. The best person I ever knew, Laurent returned, mercifully interrupting the moment. They ordered chicken for Chloe, the cheapest steak for Ryan, and Scarlett ordered the same thing they did despite the menu offering dozens of more expensive options. When the waiter suggested wine pairings, Scarlett waved him off. Just water, she said, same as them. After Laurent left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Ryan tried to think of something to say that wouldn't make everything worse, but it was Chloe who broke the quiet. Do you want to see my drawing? She asked Scarlett, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. I made it at school. Scarlett took it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a crayon picture of 3 stick figures under a rainbow. A tall figure labeled Dad, a smaller one labeled Me, and a third one with wings labeled Mom. That's beautiful, Scarlett said, and meant it. You can have it if you want, Chloe offered, for your brother, so he has something nice wherever he is. Ryan saw Scarlett's composure crack, just for a second. Her hand tightened on the paper and her jaw clenched, and she looked like she was physically holding herself together by force of will alone. Thank you, she managed. That's the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a very long time. She folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her purse, and Ryan saw her hand shake as she did it. Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in relative silence. The meal was everything the prices promised, perfectly prepared, beautifully presented, the kind of food you didn't just taste, but experienced. Chloe made happy sounds with each bite. Ryan tried not to think about the fact that this single meal was costing him 3 months of groceries. Can I ask you something? Scarlett said eventually, looking at Ryan. And you can tell me it's none of my business. Go ahead. Why this restaurant? Why tonight? If it's this expensive? Ryan set down his fork. Because I promised. Her mother and I, we made all these plans. Things we were going to do together, places we were going to take Chloe. And then Emma died. And suddenly I was alone with a 5-year-old and a mortgage and medical bills, and I realized we weren't going to do any of it. I couldn't afford it. I could barely afford to keep us housed and fed. He stopped, surprised at how easily the words were coming. He never talked about this, not to anyone. But Chloe kept asking about the places her mom wanted to go, he continued. And I kept making excuses. And I realized she was going to grow up thinking her mother's dreams didn't matter. So I saved up. Took 9 months. And here we are. Scarlett listened with the intensity of someone hearing something that mattered. That must have been hard. Everything's hard, Ryan said. You just pick which hard things you're willing to do. Across the restaurant, a commotion had started. A group of men in expensive suits had stood up from their table and were heading in their direction. Ryan recognized the type immediately. Finance guys, the kind who wore their wealth like armor and treated everyone else like props in their personal movie. The leader of the group, a man with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than Ryan's yearly salary, stopped at their table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Scarlet Vale," he said, like he was greeting an old friend instead of interrupting their dinner. "What a surprise. I heard rumors you were selling Vale Industries. Didn't believe it until now." "Hello, Marcus," Scarlett said, her voice carefully neutral. "We're having a private dinner." "I can see that." Marcus's eyes swept over Ryan and Chloe with the kind of assessment that priced them and found them wanting. "Didn't know you were into charity work these days." Ryan felt his jaw clench. Beside him, Chloe had gone still in the way children did when they sensed adult tension. "Marcus," Scarlett said, and there was warning in her voice now, "you should go back to your table." "Just saying hello to my favorite billionaire," Marcus continued, ignoring the warning. His companions laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. "Though I have to say this is an interesting choice of company. What's the story here? Single dad hoping to impress the rich lady? Maybe score a big payday?" The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. He started to stand, not sure what he was going to do, but knowing he couldn't just sit there, when Scarlett's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Stay," she said quietly. Then she turned to Marcus, and her expression went absolutely cold. "You want to know what's interesting, Marcus? I was going to let you all keep your contracts with Vale Industries when the sale went through. Standard transition clause. But now I think I'll make sure those contracts get terminated immediately. All of them. We're talking about, what, $800 million in business you're about to lose?" Marcus's smirk evaporated. "You can't do that." "I own 63% of the company," Scarlett said pleasantly. "I can do whatever I want until the ink dries on the sale papers. And those papers aren't getting signed tonight anymore, so I have all the time in the world to make your lives very difficult." "Scarlett, be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Scarlett's voice could have cut glass. "You insult my dinner companions and then ask me to be reasonable? Here's what's going to happen. You and your friends are going to go back to your table. Then you're going to leave, and tomorrow morning you're going to receive notice that your contracts are under review for violations of our ethics clause." "What ethics violation?" "I'll think of something," Scarlett said. "I'm creative like that." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Scarlett's expression made him back down. He turned to Ryan instead, probably looking for an easier target. "You have no idea what you're getting into with her," he said. "She'll use you up and throw you away. That's what she does to people." "Get out," Scarlett said, and her voice had gone deadly quiet. "Now!" Marcus finally retreated, his companions following. The entire restaurant had gone silent again, everyone watching the drama unfold. As soon as they were gone, Scarlett's rigid posture collapsed slightly. She let go of Ryan's wrist, which she'd been gripping hard enough to leave marks. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was completely out of line. I shouldn't have brought you into my mess." "You didn't bring me anywhere," Ryan said. "That guy was an asshole. You handled it. I just cost his company $800 million out of spite." "Good." Scarlett looked at him, something like surprise crossing her face. "You're not upset that I made a scene?" "Why would I be upset? He insulted my daughter. He insulted me. You think I care if you take away his money?" A laugh escaped Scarlett, sharp and unexpected. "Most people would care. Most people would tell me I was being emotional and irrational and bad for business." "Then most people can go to hell," Ryan said simply. Chloe, who had been watching everything with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to sell your company?" Scarlett looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I was. I came here tonight to sign the papers and walk away from everything I built. But now—" "But now what?" Chloe pressed. "Now I'm sitting at a table with people who remind me why I built it in the first place," Scarlett said quietly. "And that's really confusing." Laurent appeared with dessert menus, moving cautiously like he wasn't sure if there would be more yelling. Scarlett ordered nothing. Ryan ordered a chocolate cake for Chloe. When it arrived, it came with a sparkler and a little sign that said "Happy Birthday," and Chloe's face lit up in a way that made every dollar Ryan had spent suddenly worth it. "Make a wish," Ryan told her. Chloe closed her eyes, thought hard, then blew out the sparkler. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at Scarlett. "I wish that you'd stay," she said simply, "so we can be friends." Scarlett didn't respond for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and gently touched Chloe's hand. "I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd really like that." They finished dessert while the city glittered below them and the restaurant slowly emptied out. The two men in suits had given up waiting and left, probably to deal with whatever chaos Scarlett had caused by not signing the papers. Other diners departed, some shooting curious glances at their table, others pretending not to notice them at all. Finally, Ryan looked at his watch and realized it was nearly 10, way past Chloe's bedtime. "We should go," he said reluctantly. "It's late." Scarlett nodded but made no move to leave. "Thank you for letting me sit with you," she said. "You have no idea how much I needed this." "Any time," Ryan said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. They stood. Ryan signaled for the check, already steeling himself for the damage. Laurent approached with the leather folder, but before he could set it down, Scarlett plucked it from his hands. "I've got this," she said. "No," Ryan said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Ryan, I said no. This is my daughter's birthday dinner. I'm paying for it." They stared at each other across the table. Chloe watched with interest, like she was witnessing a standoff in a Western movie. "You don't have to prove anything," Scarlett said quietly. "This isn't about proving anything. This is about keeping a promise to my wife. Your wife would want you to accept help when it's offered." "You don't know what my wife would want." The words came out harsher than Ryan intended. Scarlett flinched slightly, then nodded and handed him the check folder. Ryan opened it and felt his stomach drop. The total was somehow even worse than he'd calculated. With tax and tip, it was nearly $800. Everything he'd saved, gone in a single night. He pulled out his worn debit card, the only credit card he had was maxed out on medical bills, and hoped desperately that the payment would go through without declining. Laurent took it away. Ryan tried not to think about the fact that his rent was due in 3 days and he'd have to figure out how to get another $200 by then. The card went through. Laurent returned with a receipt that Ryan didn't look at because seeing the final number would make it too real. They headed for the elevator, Scarlett walking with them. "Where are you parked?" she asked as they rode down. "Blue lot," Ryan said. "Couple blocks away. Cheaper than the restaurant garage." Scarlett looked like she wanted to say something but held back. When they reached the lobby, she stopped. "Ryan," she said, "can I give you my card? I'd like to stay in touch." Every instinct told Ryan to decline. Rich people who wanted to stay in touch usually had ulterior motives. But Chloe was already tugging on his sleeve. "Please, Dad," she said. "She's nice." Scarlett pulled a business card from her purse and held it out. Ryan took it, feeling the heavy cardstock between his fingers. It was simple, just her name, a phone number, and an email address. "Thank you for tonight," Scarlett said. "Really, you gave me something I desperately needed." "What's that?" Ryan asked. "A reason to believe people can still be good." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into a waiting car that probably cost more than Ryan would make in 5 years. Ryan and Chloe walked to the parking lot in silence. The night air was cold, and Chloe was starting to shiver despite her jacket. Ryan picked her up, letting her rest her head on his shoulder, even though she was really getting too big for it. "Dad?" she mumbled sleepily. "Yeah, baby?" That was the best birthday ever. Ryan held her tighter and tried not to think about the fact that his bank account was now empty, that there were bills coming due he couldn't pay, that tomorrow morning he'd have to figure out how to make everything work again with nothing to work with. But tonight, for a few hours, he'd kept his promise to Emma. He'd given Chloe something beautiful to remember. And somehow, in the process, he'd met a woman who seemed just as lost as he felt. He didn't know it yet, but that meeting would change everything. The truck wouldn't start. Ryan turned the key again, hearing the engine cough and wheeze like it was drowning. Chloe was asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, still wearing the smile from her birthday dinner. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few scattered cars under flickering yellow lights that barely pushed back the darkness. "Come on," Ryan muttered, trying again. The engine turned over, sputtered, then died completely. He He sat back and closed his eyes, doing the math he'd been avoiding all night. $800 gone. Rent due in 3 days. The truck had been making weird noises for a month, and he'd ignored them because fixing it would cost money he didn't have. Now it was refusing to move, and a tow truck would cost at least $150 he also didn't have. His phone buzzed. A text from his landlord. Reminder, rent due Friday. No extensions this time. Ryan's jaw clenched. He looked at Chloe sleeping peacefully and felt the familiar weight of failure settling over his shoulders. He'd given her one perfect night, and now they were stranded in a parking lot with an empty bank account and a dead truck. He tried the ignition one more time. Nothing. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. This is Scarlett. I'm still nearby. Need help? Ryan stared at the message. He hadn't given her his number, which meant she'd somehow gotten it, probably from the restaurant reservation or something equally invasive that rich people could do without thinking twice about privacy. He should have been angry. Instead, he was just tired. Against every instinct screaming at him to handle this himself, Ryan typed back, "Truck won't start. We're fine. Just need to call a tow." The response came within seconds. "Don't call a tow. Give me 5 minutes." Ryan wanted to argue, but Chloe shifted in her sleep and made a small sound, and he realized the cab was already getting cold without the heater running. 5 minutes later, headlights swept across the parking lot. A black car pulled up next to his truck, sleek and silent. Scarlett got out wearing a different coat than before, something casual that probably still cost more than Ryan's monthly salary. "Pop the hood," she said, walking around to the front of the truck without waiting for a response. Ryan climbed out, confused. "You know about cars?" "My brother and I rebuilt a '67 Mustang when I was 16, Scarlett said, already examining the engine. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. "We were broke and couldn't afford to pay mechanics, so we learned to do it ourselves." "What's it doing?" "Turning over but not catching. Makes this choking sound." Scarlett leaned in, checking connections and hoses with the confidence of someone who actually knew what they were looking for. "When's the last time you changed the fuel filter?" Ryan tried to remember. "Maybe 2 years ago?" "There's your problem. Filter's probably clogged. See this?" She pointed to something Ryan couldn't identify in the tangle of engine parts. "Fuel pressure's not getting through. You need a new filter and probably a flush of the fuel line." "I can do that tomorrow," Ryan lied. He had no idea how to flush a fuel line. Scarlett looked at him with an expression that suggested she knew exactly what his bank account looked like. "Or I can call my mechanic right now. He owes me a favor. He'll come out, fix it here, won't charge you anything." "No." "Ryan, I said no." Ryan closed the hood more forcefully than necessary. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's just help. From a billionaire who happened to sit at my table and now wants to fix all my problems, that's exactly what charity is." They stood in the cold parking lot, breath fogging between them. Scarlett's driver was still sitting in the running car, probably listening to everything. "What's your plan then?" Scarlett asked quietly. "Call a friend, get a ride home. Deal with the truck tomorrow." "What friend?" The question landed like an accusation because they both knew Ryan didn't have an answer. His supervisor might help, but it was past 11 on a weeknight, and the man had his own family. The neighbors he sometimes fixed things for would probably offer a ride, but they lived 20 minutes in the wrong direction, and he'd already asked them for too many favors. "I'll figure it out," Ryan said. Scarlett pulled out her phone. "Just let me—" "Why are you doing this?" Ryan cut her off. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So why do you care if my truck is broken?" Scarlett lowered her phone. For a long moment, she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," she said. "When my brother got sick, I had to fight every single person at that hospital just to get basic information about his treatment. I had to threaten lawsuits to see his medical records. I watched him die because a corporation chose profits over human lives, and nobody cared enough to fight for him except me. So now when I see someone struggling, I can't just walk away, even if they don't want my help." Ryan felt something crack in his chest. "I'm sorry about your brother. I'm sorry about your wife." They stood there in the parking lot, two people carrying grief they didn't know how to set down. Finally, Ryan sighed. What's your mechanic's number? 30 minutes later, a man in grease-stained coveralls showed up in a van full of tools. He worked quickly and efficiently, barely speaking except to confirm what Scarlett had already diagnosed. Fuel filter, fuel line flush, and while he was at it, he noticed the alternator was going bad and replaced that too. The whole thing took less than an hour. What do I owe you? Ryan asked when it was done. The mechanic looked at Scarlett, then back at Ryan. Nothing. Ms. Vale already took care of it. How much did she pay you? Not my business to say. The mechanic packed up his tools. Truck should run fine now. Get your oil changed soon, though. It's overdue. He left. Ryan turned to Scarlett, ready to argue, but she held up a hand. Before you start, she said, let me ask you something. If this situation was reversed, if I was the one stranded with a broken-down car and you had the ability to help, would you? That's different. How? Because I'm not... Ryan struggled to find the words. I'm not in a position to help people. I'm barely keeping my own life together. But if you could help, you would. Yeah, of course. Then why is it different when I do it? Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have a good answer. Look, Scarlett said, I know you don't want my money. I get it. Pride matters. But sometimes accepting help isn't about you. It's about the person who needs to give it. And I really, really needed to do something good tonight. Chloe woke up then, blinking sleepily from the truck. Are we home? Not yet, baby, Ryan said. Soon. Scarlett walked over to the passenger window. Hi, Chloe. Sorry for waking you up. It's okay. Is the truck fixed? Good as new. Chloe smiled, then noticed something. You're still here. I thought rich people had to go do important stuff all the time. Scarlett laughed. The important stuff can wait. Making sure you and your dad get home safe is more important right now. Ryan climbed into the truck and turned the key. The engine started immediately, purring like it hadn't in months. He sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of too many emotions he didn't know how to process. Thank you, he said finally, the words tasting like surrender. You're welcome, Scarlett said, then quieter. Can I ask you something? You said your wife worked at St. Catherine's. Was she there the night of the fire? Ryan's hands tightened on the wheel. Yeah, she was working a double shift. Her supervisor had called in sick. My brother was admitted to St. Catherine's 2 weeks before the fire, Scarlett said. They told me he needed specialized monitoring equipment that hadn't arrived yet. They kept saying it was coming, just a few more days. Then the fire happened and the whole cardiac unit was destroyed. They transferred him to another hospital, but by then it was too late. The damage was done. I'm sorry, Ryan said, and meant it. The company that delayed the equipment shipment was called MedTech Solutions, Scarlett continued. After my brother died, I spent 6 months investigating them. Found out they'd been deliberately delaying shipments to hospitals that couldn't pay premium prices, prioritizing wealthy private clinics over public hospitals. My brother died because he was in the wrong hospital with the wrong insurance. What did you do? I bought the company, Scarlett said flatly. Spent $800 million acquiring them, then fired every executive involved in the decision. Reorganized their entire distribution system, made sure it would never happen to anyone else. Ryan stared at her. $800 million. Same amount Marcus's company is about to lose, coincidentally. I have a thing about that number. That's... Ryan tried to find words. That's insane. Probably. But it was the only thing I could think to do with all this money that felt like it meant anything. Scarlett looked away. My company, Vale Industries, we built communication platforms, made billions helping people connect with each other. But I couldn't save the one person who mattered most, so I used all that money to buy a medical supply company out of revenge. That's when people started calling me ruthless. Are you? Ryan asked. Ruthless? I don't know anymore. I used to think I was just being strategic. Now I think maybe I've just been angry for 2 years and taking it out on everyone around me. Chloe had been listening to all of this with wide eyes. My teacher says being angry is okay as long as you don't hurt people. Your teacher sounds smart, Scarlett said. But you hurt those men at the restaurant, Chloe pointed out. You took away their money. Scarlett's expression shifted. You're right. I did. And I'm not sure that was the right thing to do, even though they deserved it. Dad says sometimes people deserve bad things, but we still shouldn't be the ones who give it to them, Chloe said. Because then we become bad too. Ryan felt heat creep up his neck. Chloe, that's not exactly... No, she's right, Scarlett interrupted. She crouched down to be eye level with Chloe through the window. You're absolutely right. Thank you for being honest with me. Chloe nodded seriously. You should say sorry to those men. I don't think they want to hear sorry from me. Probably not, Chloe agreed, but you should say it anyway. That's what being a good person means, even when it's hard. Scarlett looked at this 8-year-old child who had somehow managed to cut through 2 years of rage and grief with simple honesty, and something in her face crumbled. Okay, she said quietly. I'll try. Ryan started the truck. We should go. It's really late. Wait, Scarlett said. Can I see you both again? Not as charity or whatever, just as friends? Ryan hesitated. Every instinct told him to keep distance between their worlds. Rich people didn't stay friends with broken-down mechanics who could barely pay rent, but Chloe was already nodding enthusiastically. Can she come to my school show? Chloe asked. It's next Friday. We're doing a thing about space. I wouldn't miss it, Scarlett said immediately. You don't have to, Ryan started. I want to, Scarlett cut him off. Please, let me be there. Ryan looked at her and saw the same desperation he felt most days. The need to matter to someone. To be part of something that felt real instead of just surviving. Okay, he said. Friday at 7. Lincoln Elementary. I'll be there. They drove home through empty streets while Chloe chattered about her space show costume. Ryan only half listened, his mind still back in that parking lot with Scarlett's confession echoing in his head. She'd spent $800 million on revenge. The number was so absurd it didn't feel real. His phone buzzed. Another text from Scarlett. Thank you for letting me help, and tell Chloe she's right about apologizing. I needed to hear that. Ryan didn't respond. He focused on driving, on getting Chloe home safely, on not thinking about the fact that his life had somehow gotten tangled up with a billionaire who was either incredibly generous or incredibly broken, or possibly both. They reached their apartment building just after midnight. It was a 4-story walk-up in a neighborhood that had once been nice and was now just tired. The front door stuck like it always did. The hallway smelled like cooking oil and old carpet. Ryan carried a half-asleep Chloe up 3 flights of stairs, her arms wrapped around his neck. Dad, she mumbled as he unlocked their door. Yeah, baby. I like Scarlett. She's sad like us, but she's trying not to be. Ryan got her into bed without bothering to change her clothes. As he pulled the blanket up, Chloe grabbed his hand. Do you think Mom would like her? The question hit Ryan in the chest. He thought about Emma, who'd always seen the best in people, who'd spent her life taking care of strangers in hospital beds, who'd probably tell him to stop being stubborn and let someone help for once. Yeah, he said softly. I think she would. Chloe smiled and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Ryan walked into their tiny kitchen and finally looked at the receipt from dinner. $847. His entire savings gone. He opened his laptop and checked his bank account. $312 remaining until his next paycheck in 6 days. Rent was $700, due in 3 days. He was $500 short with no way to make it up. Ryan sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, trying to figure out how he'd gotten here. He'd done everything right, worked every shift available, never spent money on anything unnecessary, kept them fed and housed and alive. And still it wasn't enough. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification. Subject line, Payment Received, Medical Collections Account. Ryan's heart stopped. He opened the email. Dear Mr. Mercer, this notice is to inform you that your outstanding balance of $47,832.18 for services rendered to Emma Mercer has been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. Your account is now closed. No further action is required. Ryan read it 3 times. Then he opened the collections company's website and logged into his account. The balance showed 0. She'd paid off Emma's medical debt, $47,000, just erased, like it was nothing. Ryan felt something break inside him, Rage and relief and shame all tangled together until he couldn't separate them. He grabbed his phone and called Scarlett's number before he could think better of it. She answered on the first ring. "Ryan? You paid off my wife's medical bills." Silence. Then, "Yes. You had no right to do that." "I know. That was my debt, my responsibility. You can't just throw money at people's problems without asking." "I know," Scarlett said again. Her voice was steady, but Ryan could hear something underneath it. Fear, maybe. "I'm sorry. I should have asked first." "Why did you do it?" "Because I could." She paused. "And because I looked up the hospital bills after you told me about Emma. I saw the debt was with a collections agency. I knew what that meant, how they'd be calling you constantly, threatening your credit, making everything harder. And I thought about how you'd spent all your savings on a birthday dinner because you made a promise to your wife, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand the idea of you drowning in debt from the same hospital where my brother died." Ryan's anger deflated like a punctured tire. "That was almost $50,000. "I know. Scarlett, normal people don't just have that kind of money lying around. I'm not normal people." She sounded tired. "I'm someone with more money than I know what to do with and no one left to spend it on. So when I see someone being crushed by medical debt that shouldn't exist in the first place, yeah, I pay it off. It's not charity, it's just trying to make one tiny thing less terrible in a world that's mostly terrible." Ryan didn't know what to say to that. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below, where a few cars passed under broken streetlights. "I don't know how to thank you for this," he said finally. "You don't have to thank me. Just don't shut me out. That's all I'm asking. Let me be part of your and Chloe's lives, not as some rich person throwing money around, just as someone who needs friends as much as you do." "I don't know if I can do that." "Why not?" "Because people like you don't stay friends with people like me. Eventually you'll remember you're a billionaire and I'm a mechanic who can barely afford rent, and this will all fall apart." "Is that what you really think?" Scarlett asked quietly. "It's what I know. I've seen how the world works." "Then you haven't seen much of it." There was an edge to her voice now. "You think I care about money? Money didn't save my brother. Money didn't stop me from feeling completely alone for the past 2 years. Money has bought me exactly nothing that matters. You know what mattered? Sitting at a table with you and Chloe tonight, feeling like maybe I'm not completely broken. That's worth more than every dollar in my account." Ryan pressed his forehead against the cold window glass. "This is too much. All of it. I know. I'm sorry. I pushed too hard. I always have." "That's not what I meant." Ryan struggled to find words. "I meant it's too much to process. My wife died 3 years ago, and I've spent every day since then just trying to survive. I don't know how to let someone help me. I don't know how to be anything other than alone." "Then we can figure it out together," Scarlett said, "because I don't know how to be anything other than alone either, and maybe that's exactly why we found each other." Ryan closed his eyes. "I'm still angry you paid that debt without asking. You have every right to be. But I'm also grateful. And I hate that I'm grateful. I know. I'm sorry." They stayed on the phone in silence for a while. Finally, Ryan spoke again. "Chloe's school show really is next Friday, 7 p.m., Lincoln Elementary on Clark Street." "I'll be there," Scarlett promised. "And Scarlett? Thank you for everything tonight, even the parts I'm angry about." "You're welcome. Get some sleep, Ryan." He hung up and stood at the window for a long time, watching the city that had always felt too big and too expensive and too indifferent to people like him. Somewhere out there, Scarlett Vale was probably standing at a different window in a penthouse apartment, looking at the same city with the same feeling of not belonging. Ryan thought about Chloe's question. Would Emma like Scarlett? Yeah, Emma would have loved her, would have seen right through the billionaire facade to the broken person underneath. Would have probably already adopted her into their family the way she'd adopted every stray that crossed her path. Ryan went to bed but didn't sleep. He kept thinking about medical debt that no longer existed, about a truck that ran better than it had in years, about a woman who'd sat at their table because she needed to remember what normal people felt like. He thought about how one dinner had somehow opened a door he didn't know existed, and he wasn't sure if walking through it would save him or destroy him. But for the first time in 3 years, he was curious enough to find out. Friday came too quickly. Ryan left work early to get Chloe ready for her space show, fighting rush hour traffic that made him regret every decision that led to this moment. Chloe was vibrating with excitement, practicing her lines about the solar system while Ryan drove. "Do you think Scarlett will really come?" she asked for the 5th time. She said she would. But what if she forgot? Important people forget things sometimes. Ryan hoped she hadn't forgotten, not because he particularly wanted Scarlett there, but because Chloe's face would crumble if she didn't show, and Ryan couldn't handle his daughter being disappointed by someone else who made promises they didn't keep. They reached the school at 6:30. The auditorium was already filling with parents holding phones and cameras, grandparents, younger siblings running around despite teachers asking them not to. Ryan found a seat in the middle section, saving the one next to him, even though he wasn't sure Scarlett would actually appear. 6:45. No Scarlett. 6:55. Still nothing. Ryan felt his jaw tighten. Of course she wasn't coming. She'd probably gotten pulled into some business meeting or decided this whole thing was beneath her, or simply forgotten that regular people's lives continued without her. At 6:59, the auditorium lights started dimming. Parents rushed to their seats. The principal walked on stage to welcome everyone. Then Scarlett Vale slipped into the seat next to Ryan, slightly out of breath, still wearing what looked like business clothes under a long coat. "Sorry," she whispered. "Board meeting ran late. Did I miss anything?" "It's just starting." "Good." She settled in, looking around at the elementary school auditorium like it was the most interesting place she'd ever been. Several parents nearby had recognized her and were whispering, but Scarlett seemed oblivious. The show started. Kids dressed as planets paraded across the stage while enthusiastic teachers provided narration. Chloe was Mars, wearing a red costume Ryan had spent 2 nights sewing together from supplies he'd found at a thrift store. She delivered her lines perfectly, talking about how Mars was cold and lonely and far from Earth but still part of the same solar system. "She's wonderful," Scarlett whispered. Ryan watched his daughter and felt his chest tighten with pride. "Yeah, she is." After the show, kids poured into the auditorium to find their families. Chloe spotted them and ran over, her face glowing. "You came!" she shouted at Scarlett. "Of course I did, I promised." Scarlett pulled out her phone. "Can I take a picture of you in your costume?" Chloe posed dramatically while Scarlett took several photos. Other parents were staring now, some trying to approach, but Scarlett kept her attention focused entirely on Chloe. "You were the best planet up there," Scarlett declared. "I was the only Mars," Chloe pointed out logically. "Exactly. Unmatched." They left the school together, Chloe still chattering about the show. Outside, Ryan noticed a black car waiting at the curb, Scarlett's driver. "Can we give you a ride somewhere?" Scarlett offered. "Maybe dinner." Ryan was about to decline when Chloe jumped in. "Can we go to that place with the good pizza? Dad's always saying we can't afford it, but maybe today we can." "Chloe," Ryan said sharply. "What? I'm just asking." Scarlett looked at Ryan. "What pizza place?" "Nothing fancy, just a spot near our apartment. Really, we should just head home." "Or," Scarlett said carefully, "we could go to this definitely not fancy pizza place, and I could buy dinner, and you could not argue about it because your daughter just performed her heart out on stage and deserves to celebrate." Ryan wanted to argue, but Chloe was looking at him with such hope, and honestly, he was exhausted from fighting. "Fine," he said, "but we're going in my truck. You can follow if you want." They ended up at Marco's Pizza, a neighborhood joint with plastic booths and grease-stained menus. Scarlett looked more out of place than she had at the expensive rooftop restaurant, but she slid into the booth across from Ryan and Chloe without hesitation. "What's good here?" she asked. "Everything," Chloe declared, "but especially the pepperoni." They ordered 2 large pizzas and breadsticks. While they waited, Chloe told Scarlett about school, about her best friend Maya, who was moving away next month, about the book report she had due next week. Scarlett listened like it was the most important conversation she'd ever had. "What about you?" Chloe asked eventually. "Do you have kids?" "No," Scarlett said, something flickering across her face. "Why not?" "Chloe," Ryan warned. "It's okay," Scarlett said. She thought for a moment. "I guess I never found the right person to have kids with." And then I got so busy building my company that I stopped thinking about it. That's sad, Chloe said with devastating honesty. Yeah, Scarlett agreed. It kind of is. The pizza arrived and they ate while Marco himself came over to say hello. He'd known Ryan since Chloe was a baby, had given them free meals more times than Ryan could count after Emma died. Haven't seen you folks in a while, Marco said. Then he noticed Scarlett and his eyes went wide. Holy hell, you're Scarlett Vale. Guilty, Scarlett said with a small smile. My daughter, she works in tech, always talking about you, says you're a genius. Your daughter's too kind. Marco looked between Scarlett and Ryan like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You two friends? Yeah, Scarlett said before Ryan could answer. We are. After Marco left, Ryan turned to Scarlett. That going to be a problem? People recognizing you? Probably, but I don't care. She took a bite of pizza and made a sound of approval. This is really good. Best in the neighborhood, Ryan agreed. They finished eating while Chloe drew on napkins with crayons Marco had brought over. Eventually, Chloe's eyes started drooping. I should get her home, Ryan said, pulling out his wallet. Scarlett's hand shot out. I've got this. Scarlett. Ryan, it's pizza. Let me buy my friend's pizza. Ryan looked at her tired eyes and remembered what she'd said on the phone about needing friends as much as he did. He put his wallet away. Thank you. Outside, Scarlett's driver was still waiting. She told him to go home, that she'd catch a car service later. The driver looked uncertain, but obeyed. Why did you do that? Ryan asked. Because I don't want to leave yet. Scarlett looked almost embarrassed. Is that weird? Yeah, Ryan said honestly. But okay. They walked to his truck. Chloe was practically asleep on her feet, so Ryan lifted her into the passenger seat. She curled up immediately, eyes closing. She's lucky to have you, Scarlett said quietly. I'm the lucky one. No, trust me. Having a parent who shows up, who tries, who gives a damn, that's rare. Ryan closed the truck door gently. Your parents didn't show up? They died when I was 19, car accident. My brother was 16. After that, it was just us. Scarlett leaned against the truck. I raised him, put myself through college, built a company, and thought I was doing everything right. Then he died anyway, and I realized I'd failed at the only thing that actually mattered. You didn't fail him, Ryan said. You fought for him. You were there. That's not failure. Then why does it feel like it? Ryan didn't have an answer. They stood in the parking lot while the city hummed around them, two people carrying grief that refused to let go. I don't know how to do this, Scarlett said finally. Be friends with people. I've spent 2 years pushing everyone away. I don't know how to let anyone close anymore. Neither do I, Ryan admitted. I've spent 3 years just surviving. I don't remember how to do anything else. So we're both terrible at this. Apparently. Scarlett laughed, sharp and unexpected. What a pair we make. Ryan found himself smiling despite everything. Yeah, real disaster. Ryan? Scarlett's voice went serious. Thank you for not giving up on me. I know I'm a lot to deal with. You're not that bad, mostly just confusing. I can work with confusing. Ryan opened his door. I should get Chloe home. Wait. Scarlett pulled something from her pocket. A business card, different from the one she'd given him before. This is my personal number, not the office line. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, call me, okay? Ryan took the card. Okay. I mean it. 3 a.m. and your sink explodes? Call me. Chloe's sick and you need help? Call me. You just want to talk to someone who gets it? Call me. Why? Ryan asked. Why do you care this much? Scarlett looked at him for a long moment. Because you're the first person in 2 years who's treated me like a human being instead of a bank account or a business opportunity, and I'm not ready to lose that. Ryan didn't know what to say to that kind of honesty, so he just nodded and climbed into his truck. As he drove away, he watched Scarlett in the rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, and wondered if maybe they were both exactly what the other needed to stop feeling so lost. Ryan used Scarlett's business card 3 times in the next 2 weeks, and each time he hated himself a little more for it. The first time was when the bathroom pipe finally burst at 2 in the morning, flooding the apartment with water that soaked through Chloe's bedroom floor. Ryan had called every plumber he could find, but none would come out until morning, and by then the damage would be catastrophic. He'd stared at Scarlett's card for 20 minutes before finally dialing, hating that he needed help, hating that she was the only person he knew who could actually provide it. She'd answered immediately, despite the hour, and had a plumber there within 40 minutes. The man fixed the pipe, assessed the water damage, and told Ryan he'd send a restoration crew in the morning. When Ryan asked how much he owed, the plumber just shook his head and said it was handled. The second time was when Chloe's school called to say she'd gotten sick and needed to be picked up, but Ryan was 2 hours away on a job site with a generator that absolutely had to be fixed before the hospital lost backup power. He'd tried everyone, his supervisor, the neighbors, even Chloe's friends' parents, but nobody was available. Finally, with his hands shaking and shame burning in his throat, he'd called Scarlett. She'd picked Chloe up within 20 minutes, taken her to a doctor despite Ryan's protests, and kept her comfortable at her own apartment until Ryan could get there. When he'd arrived, exhausted and guilt-ridden and ready to apologize for the imposition, Scarlett had just smiled and said Chloe had been great company. The third time wasn't even Ryan's choice. His supervisor had called him into the office and told him, almost apologetically, that the company was downsizing. Ryan's position was being eliminated. He had 2 weeks. Ryan had sat in his truck in the parking lot afterward, staring at nothing, doing math that didn't work no matter how many times he ran the numbers. Without a job, he couldn't pay rent. Without rent, he and Chloe would be homeless. He had maybe 3 months of expenses saved up if he was very careful, and finding a new job in his field could take that long or longer. He hadn't called Scarlett that time, but somehow she'd known anyway. His phone rang an hour after he'd gotten the news, and when he answered, she'd said, "I heard about your job. I'm sorry." "How did you hear?" Ryan asked, too tired to be angry about her somehow having information about his life. "Your supervisor's wife works in my legal department. She mentioned it. Are you okay?" "No, not really. Can I help?" "I don't know how you could." "Let me buy you coffee, just coffee, and we'll talk about it." They met at a diner near Ryan's apartment, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted burnt but cost $1. Scarlett showed up in jeans and a sweater, looking more like a regular person than a billionaire, though Ryan noticed people still stared. "I've been thinking," she said once they'd ordered, "and before you immediately say no, I need you to actually listen." "Okay," Ryan said warily. "I'm starting something. A nonprofit focused on emergency infrastructure in underserved communities. Hospitals, disaster zones, places that need reliable power and communication systems, but can't afford the kind of corporate solutions that exist now." "That sounds good. I need people who understand this work, not just theoretically, but practically. People who've actually spent time in the field fixing systems when they fail." She looked at him directly. "I need someone like you." Ryan's stomach dropped. "Scarlett, before you say no, hear the whole thing. This isn't charity. I'm not creating a position just for you. I was planning this for months since before we met. But I do want you to consider joining once it's operational. Not now. Not as some emergency rescue of your current situation, but in 6 months or a year, once you've had time to think about whether this is something you actually want." "Why are you telling me this now then?" "Because I want you to know you have options. That losing this job isn't the end of the world, even though it feels like it right now. You're skilled, Ryan. Any company would be lucky to have you. And when you're ready, I'd love for you to consider working on something that actually matters instead of just keeping the lights on for corporations that don't appreciate you." Ryan stirred his terrible coffee and tried to sort through his feelings. Part of him wanted to jump at the opportunity immediately. The other part was screaming that this was exactly what he'd feared. Becoming dependent on Scarlett, accepting opportunities he hadn't earned, turning their friendship into something transactional. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but I need to find my own way out of this. I can't just take a job from you because we're friends." "Then don't think of it as taking a job from me. Think of it as me offering you an opportunity to do meaningful work because you're qualified, and we happen to also be friends." "Is there a difference?" "A big one. One assumes you're only getting the job because of our personal connection. The other acknowledges that you have skills and experience that would be valuable regardless of whether we'd ever met." Ryan wanted to believe her, But years of scraping by had taught him that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "In the meantime, I need to focus on finding something now. I've got rent due in 2 weeks and a daughter to feed." "I understand. Just promise me you'll keep that option in mind." "I will." They finished their coffee while Scarlett told him about her plans for the nonprofit. She'd already hired a legal team to handle the paperwork, found office space, started reaching out to engineers and infrastructure specialists. She talked about it with an intensity Ryan recognized, the same focus she'd brought to everything since her brother died. This wasn't just a project to her. It was a mission. "Why this?" Ryan asked. "Why infrastructure specifically?" "Because hospitals fail when the power goes out. Because disaster zones become worse disasters when people can't communicate. Because my brother died partially due to systems that broke down when they were needed most." Her jaw tightened. "I can't bring him back, but I can make sure other people don't die for the same reasons." Ryan understood that kind of grief, the kind that turned into action because sitting still with it would destroy you. Emma had died trying to save people. Scarlett's brother had died because systems failed. They were both trying to make meaning from loss. "It's a good thing you're doing," Ryan said quietly. "It'll be better if you're part of it, but no pressure." Over the next few weeks, Ryan threw himself into the job search. He sent out dozens of applications, went to interviews, followed every lead he could find. The problem was that most companies wanted either young engineers with fresh degrees or experienced people who already had specialized certifications Ryan lacked. He was stuck in a middle ground, too experienced to be cheap, not credentialed enough to be valuable. Meanwhile, money was getting tight. Ryan started skipping meals to make the food budget stretch further. He stopped heating the apartment as much, piling extra blankets on Chloe's bed at night. He picked up side work fixing appliances and doing electrical repairs for neighbors, cash under the table that bought them another week or two. Scarlett kept calling, kept checking in, and Ryan kept pretending everything was fine even though it clearly wasn't. She'd started showing up more often, always with some excuse. She was in the neighborhood. She'd picked up extra food she needed to get rid of. She wanted Chloe's opinion on something. Ryan knew she could see through his pretense, but she never pushed. 6 weeks after losing his job, Ryan was down to his last $200. Rent was due in 3 days, and he was $1,000 short. He'd sold everything he could think to sell. He'd asked for advances from every side job client. He'd even considered payday loans before realizing the interest rates would only make things worse. He was sitting at his kitchen table at midnight, staring at eviction paperwork and trying to figure out where he and Chloe could go if they lost the apartment, when someone knocked on his door. Ryan opened it to find Scarlett standing there with 2 bags of Chinese takeout. "I know it's late," she said, "but I was hungry and I ordered too much and thought maybe you'd help me eat it." It was the thinnest excuse she'd used yet. Ryan should have sent her away. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in. They sat at his kitchen table eating directly from the containers because Ryan didn't want to waste time washing dishes he couldn't afford soap for. Scarlett didn't comment on the cold apartment or the way Ryan was carefully rationing the food or the eviction notice he'd shoved under some papers when she arrived. She just ate her lo mein and told him stories about the nonprofit's progress, keeping the conversation light. Finally, as they were finishing, Scarlett set down her chopsticks and looked at him directly. "How bad is it?" Ryan thought about lying. He'd gotten good at it over the past weeks. But sitting across from someone who'd shown up at midnight with food she definitely hadn't overordered, he found he couldn't. "I'm 3 days from losing the apartment." Scarlett's expression didn't change. "How much do you need?" "It doesn't matter." "Ryan, I'm serious. I can't keep taking from you. It's not fair to either of us." "What's not fair is you losing your home because you're too proud to let someone help." "It's not about pride. It's about..." Ryan struggled to find words. "It's about the fact that I don't know where the line is anymore. Between friendship and charity. Between help and dependence. You keep solving my problems, and I keep needing more help, and eventually I'm going to turn into someone who just expects you to fix everything. Or," Scarlett said quietly, "you're going to get through a rough patch and then be in a position to help someone else when they're struggling. That's how this works, Ryan. People help each other. It's not a debt ledger. It's just being human." Easy to say when you're the one with unlimited money. The words came out harsher than Ryan intended. Scarlett flinched. You're right, she said after a moment. It is easy for me to say because I don't know what it's like to worry about money. I've never had to choose between rent and food. I've never had to tell my kid we can't afford something she needs, so I'm sorry if I'm being insensitive about what you're going through. Ryan felt guilt replace anger. I'm sorry, that was out of line. No, it wasn't. It was honest, and I asked for honesty. They sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Scarlett spoke again. Can I tell you something? And I need you to really hear it. Okay. Date. When my brother got sick, I tried to handle everything myself. I didn't ask for help because I thought that's what strong people did. They figured things out alone. And because of that, because I was too stubborn and too proud and too convinced I had to do everything myself, I missed signs I should have caught. I didn't push hard enough for second opinions. I didn't question doctors when my gut told me something was wrong. I let him die because I thought asking for help was weakness. Her voice cracked slightly. Ryan had never seen her this vulnerable. So now when I see someone I care about drowning because they won't ask for help, it terrifies me. Because I know where that ends. And I can't lose anyone else to the lie that we're supposed to handle everything alone. Ryan felt something break in his chest. I'm not your brother. I know, but you're someone I care about. And Chloe is someone I love. And the thought of you both being homeless because you're too proud to let me help? That's not something I can live with. What do you want from me? Ryan asked, and he wasn't sure if he was angry or desperate or both. I want you to let me pay your rent this month, not as a loan, not as something you have to pay back, just as a friend helping a friend through a crisis. That's $1,000. I know. That's not friendship. It's nothing, Scarlett interrupted. Ryan, $1,000 is nothing to me. I literally make that much in interest on my investments every few hours. It means nothing in my life except as numbers in an account, but it means everything in yours. So please let me give you something that costs me nothing, but means everything to you. Ryan wanted to refuse. Every instinct was screaming at him to stand up, thank her politely, and show her the door, but he thought about Chloe sleeping in the next room, about what it would do to her to lose another home, another piece of stability, about the fact that his pride wasn't worth her security. Okay, he said, the word tasting like surrender. But this is the last time. After this, I figure things out on my own. After this, you'll have a job, and you won't need help, Scarlett said gently. But if you do need help again, I hope you'll ask instead of waiting until you're 3 days from eviction. She pulled out her phone and made some transfers while Ryan sat there feeling simultaneously grateful and ashamed. Within minutes, his bank account had enough to cover rent, utilities, and groceries for the month. It was more than she'd said. He was too tired to argue about it. Thank you, he managed. You're welcome. Scarlett stood up to leave. And Ryan, the job offer still stands. When you're ready, we'd love to have you. Not because you need the money or because we're friends, but because you're good at what you do and we need good people. After she left, Ryan sat at his kitchen table for a long time, staring at his phone showing a bank balance he hadn't seen in years. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he just felt trapped. The next morning, Ryan paid his rent and bought groceries without having to choose what to put back. He took Chloe to school and went to another job interview, this one for a position that would barely cover their basic expenses, but at least represented independence. The interviewer told him he'd hear back in a week. That night, lying in bed, Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from Scarlett. I know you're mad at me, and I get it, but I'm not sorry for helping. Talk when you're ready. Ryan stared at the message for a long time before responding. Not mad, just trying to figure out how to accept help without losing myself. Her reply came immediately. You won't lose yourself, I promise. You're too stubborn for that. Despite everything, Ryan smiled. A week later, Ryan got a call from the company where he'd interviewed. They were offering him the position, starting in 2 weeks. The salary was less than he'd made before, but it would be enough. Barely, but enough. He accepted immediately and spent the next hour doing budget calculations that actually worked for once. He called Scarlett to tell her the good news. She answered on the first ring. I got a job, he said. That's amazing. Tell me everything. He explained the position, the salary, the start date. Scarlett listened and congratulated him, without mentioning that her nonprofit offer would have paid significantly more. Ryan appreciated that restraint more than she probably knew. "So I can start paying you back," he said. "It'll take a while, but I'll pay back everything you've spent on us." "Ryan, we talked about this. It's not a loan." "I know what you said, but I need to do this. For myself." There was a long pause. Then Scarlett sighed. "Okay, if it makes you feel better, you can pay me back. But there's no rush and no interest, just whenever you can afford it." "Thank you." "You're welcome. Can I take you and Chloe to dinner to celebrate?" Ryan was about to decline automatically, then stopped himself. Scarlett was his friend. Friends celebrated each other's victories, and he was tired of treating every interaction like a negotiation. "Yeah," he said. "That would be nice." They went back to Marco's Pizza because fancy restaurants felt like too much and fast food felt like too little. Chloe told them about school while they ate, and Scarlett asked questions like she actually cared about third-grade drama, and Ryan watched them interact with something warm in his chest. After Chloe went to the bathroom, Scarlett turned to Ryan with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Are we okay? Like really okay? Because I know these past few weeks have been hard and I'm worried I pushed too much." Ryan thought about it honestly. "I think we're okay. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "I'm always going to struggle with accepting help. It's not about you, it's about how I was raised, how I've survived, who I am. So sometimes I'm going to pull away or get defensive or act like an ass even though I'm grateful. And I need you to understand that's my issue to work through, not something you need to fix." Scarlett nodded slowly. "I can do that. But you need to understand something too." "What's that?" "I'm always going to want to help people I care about. It's not about control or feeling superior. It's because watching people struggle when I could make things easier feels wrong. So sometimes I'm going to offer help even when you don't want it. And I need you to understand that's coming from care, not pity." "So we're both going to drive each other crazy." "Probably," Scarlett agreed with a small smile. Chloe returned to the table and immediately sensed the shift in mood. "Are you guys having a moment?" she asked suspiciously. "What's a moment?" Ryan asked. "It's what Maya's mom calls it when adults are being weird and emotional at each other." "We're not being weird," Scarlett protested. "Yes, you are. You have that look." "What look?" "The one adults get when they're talking about important things." Chloe made air quotes around the last two words. "It's fine. You can keep having your moment. I'll just eat my pizza." Ryan and Scarlett looked at each other and started laughing. This kid was too perceptive for her own good. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Ryan started his new job and threw himself into proving he deserved the position. It was hard work, long hours, difficult problems, constant pressure, but it was honest employment that paid the bills. Scarlett continued building her nonprofit, and occasionally she'd send Ryan articles about infrastructure projects or call to ask technical questions. He helped when he could, offering advice based on his practical experience. They texted most days, nothing important, just checking in. Chloe's school pictures. Funny things that happened at work. Weekend plans. The kind of mundane communication that characterized actual friendship instead of whatever complicated thing they'd been doing before. One night, about a month into Ryan's new job, Scarlett called late. "I'm outside your building," she said without preamble. "Can I come up?" Ryan looked around his apartment, which was its usual state of barely controlled chaos. "Yeah, sure." She appeared at his door a few minutes later, looking disheveled in a way Ryan had never seen. Her hair was pulled back messily, she was wearing sweatpants, and her eyes were red. "Are you okay?" he asked immediately. "Today was the anniversary of my brother's death," she said flatly, "and I spent it at board meetings pretending I was fine, and now I'm not fine, and I didn't want to be alone in my apartment where everything reminds me of him." Ryan stepped aside and let her in. "Chloe's asleep. We can talk in the kitchen." They sat at the table where they'd had so many conversations over the past months. Ryan made tea because he didn't know what else to do. "I'm sorry," Scarlett said. "I shouldn't have just shown up." "You said I could call you any time. That works both ways." "Does it?" "Yeah, it does." Scarlett wrapped her hands around the tea mug. "I thought I was doing better. The nonprofit helps, Feeling like I'm doing something meaningful helps. But today I just kept thinking about how he should be here, how he should have gotten to see me start this organization, how he would have had ideas and opinions and probably would have told me I was doing it all wrong. Tell me about him, Ryan said. Not about how he died, about who he was. So Scarlett talked. She told him about growing up together after their parents died, about how her brother had been the funny one while she was serious, about how he'd supported her business dreams even when they seemed impossible. She talked about inside jokes and shared memories and all the small moments that made someone real instead of just a tragedy. Ryan listened and occasionally asked questions, and slowly the tension in Scarlett's shoulders eased. When she finally went quiet, it felt peaceful instead of painful. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me talk about him. Anytime. Can I ask you something about Emma?" "Sure." "Do you still feel guilty about being okay without her?" Ryan thought about it. "Sometimes, especially when I'm happy, like I'm betraying her by moving on." "Does it get easier?" "Not easier, just different. You learn to carry it instead of letting it crush you." Scarlett nodded like she understood. They sat in comfortable silence until she finally stood to leave. "Scarlett?" Ryan said as she reached the door. "Yeah? I'm glad you came here instead of being alone." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Me too." After she left, Ryan went to bed thinking about loss and friendship, and how sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was just let them not be okay for a while. He thought about Emma, who would have liked Scarlett, who would have told him to stop being so stubborn about accepting help. And he thought about how maybe, finally, he was learning that being strong didn't mean carrying everything alone. His phone buzzed with a text from Scarlett. "Thank you for tonight. You're a good friend." Ryan typed back, "So are you." And despite all the complications, despite the money and the differences in their lives and his persistent discomfort with needing help, that felt like the truest thing he'd said in a long time. The argument started in a hospital parking lot at 2 a.m, which felt appropriate given how everything between them seemed to happen in places where regular people didn't belong. Ryan had called Scarlett's personal number for the first time, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. Chloe had woken up screaming, her fever spiking to 104, and the emergency room was packed with people who'd been waiting for hours. He tried to handle it alone, tried to be the father who didn't need help, but watching Chloe cry in pain while nurses kept saying just a little longer had broken something in him. Scarlett had answered on the first ring despite the hour. "I'm on my way," she'd said before he'd even finished explaining. 20 minutes later, she'd walk through those emergency room doors like she owned the place, which Ryan learned later she technically did through some complicated series of investments he didn't understand. Within 5 minutes, Chloe had been taken back to a room. Within 10, a doctor was examining her. Scarlett had made exactly 2 phone calls, and suddenly, the hospital that couldn't find staff was fully attentive. That's what led to Ryan standing in the parking lot now, 3 hours later, with Chloe finally sleeping peacefully after being diagnosed with a severe ear infection and pumped full of antibiotics. Scarlett had stayed the entire time, sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs, making sure they had everything they needed. And Ryan couldn't decide if he was grateful or furious. "You can't just do that," he said, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake Chloe in the truck behind him. "Do what?" Scarlett asked. She looked exhausted, still wearing the sweatpants and oversized hoodie she'd clearly thrown on when he called. "Show up and throw your weight around. Make phone calls that get us special treatment. That's not how the world works for normal people." "I know that. That's exactly why I did it. But it's not fair to everyone else who's still waiting." "You're right. It's not fair. Nothing about our healthcare system is fair, but your daughter was in pain and I had the ability to help, so I did." Scarlett's jaw tightened. "Are you seriously angry at me for making sure Chloe got medical attention?" "I'm angry that you made me need you," Ryan shot back. "I called you because I was desperate, and you showed up and fixed everything, and now I'm standing here realizing I can't do this without you, and that terrifies me." Scarlett took a step back like he'd slapped her. "You don't need me. You're doing fine on your own." "I'm not doing fine. I'm drowning, and you keep throwing me life preservers, and every time I grab one, I lose a little more of myself." "That's not what I'm trying to do." "But it's what's happening." Ryan ran his hand through his hair. 3 months ago, I didn't know you existed. Now you've paid off my debt, fixed my truck, gotten my daughter immediate medical care, and probably a dozen other things I don't even know about. How am I supposed to feel like an equal when you can solve all my problems with a phone call? I don't want you to feel like less than me, Scarlett said, her voice cracking slightly. I just want to help. I know, and that's the problem, because I'm starting to rely on you. And what happens when you get tired of playing savior to the broke mechanic and his kid? What happens when you remember you're a billionaire with better things to do? Is that really what you think of me? Scarlett's eyes were bright, like she might cry. That I'm just playing? That this is some kind of charity project I'll get bored with? I don't know what to think anymore. They stood in the harsh fluorescent light of the parking lot, the space between them feeling wider than it had in weeks. Finally, Scarlett spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You want to know the truth? I'm terrified too, because you and Chloe are the only things that have felt real to me since my brother died. Every morning I wake up and the first thing I think about is whether you might need something, whether Chloe's okay, whether I'll get to see you both that day. And yeah, I use my money to help because that's the only thing I know how to do. But it's not about power or control. It's about the fact that I can't stand watching people I care about struggle when I have the ability to make it easier. But that's just it, Ryan said. You care about us, but I don't know why. What are we to you, a redemption project? A way to feel less guilty about having so much money? Scarlett flinched. That's not fair. Neither is any of this. You're right. Nothing about this situation is fair, but I'm not going to apologize for caring about you. Her voice hardened slightly. You called me tonight. You needed help, and you reached out. So either we're friends who help each other, or we're not. You don't get to accept my help and then throw it back in my face when you're feeling guilty about needing it. Ryan wanted to argue, but she was right. He'd called her. He'd asked for help. And she'd shown up without hesitation, without judgment, without making him feel small for needing her. I'm sorry, he said finally. You didn't deserve that. No, I didn't. Scarlett wrapped her arms around herself. But I get it. You're scared of depending on someone. I am too. Every time I let myself care about someone, they leave. My parents died. My brother died. So yeah, I understand being terrified of needing people. They stood there in silence, two broken people trying to figure out how to be less broken together. After a moment, Ryan stepped closer. I don't want to push you away, he admitted, but I don't know how to do this. How to accept help without losing myself. Then we figure it out together. Scarlett met his eyes. But you have to stop assuming I'm going to leave. I'm here because I want to be, not because I'm obligated or because it makes me feel good about myself. I'm here because you and Chloe matter to me, okay? Ryan nodded slowly. Okay. And for the record, you're not drowning. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You work impossible hours, raise an incredible daughter alone, and somehow manage to be kind even when life keeps kicking you. That's not drowning. That's surviving. And there's no shame in letting someone help you survive a little easier. Ryan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Thank you for tonight, for all of it. You're welcome. Scarlett glanced at the truck where Chloe was sleeping. She's going to be okay? Yeah, the doctor said the infection was bad, but the antibiotics should handle it. She needs to rest for a few days. Take time off work. I'll cover whatever you lose in wages. Scarlett, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering to make sure you can take care of your sick daughter without worrying about money. There's a difference. Ryan wanted to argue, but he was too tired. Can we talk about this when it's not 3 a.m? Sure. Scarlett pulled her phone out. I should call a car. I can drive you home. You have a sick kid in your truck. I'm not making you go out of your way. You came all the way here at 2 a.m. The least I can do is give you a ride. Scarlett looked like she might argue, but then she just nodded. Okay. They drove through empty streets, the city feeling like a different place at this hour. Chloe slept in the back seat, her breathing finally even and peaceful. Scarlett gave Ryan directions to a high-rise building in a neighborhood where the average apartment probably cost more than Ryan would make in a lifetime. This is it, Scarlett said as they pulled up. A doorman immediately appeared, ready to open doors and assist with whatever rich people needed at 3 a.m. Scarlett? Ryan said before she could get out. Yeah? I'm sorry. for earlier, for making this harder than it needs to be. You don't have to apologize for having feelings. She smiled tiredly. But maybe next time we can have our existential crisis about friendship during normal hours. Deal. She climbed out, then leaned back in. Take care of her, and yourself. I'll check in tomorrow. Ryan watched her disappear into the building, then drove home with too many thoughts racing through his head. He carried Chloe upstairs, got her settled in bed with medication and water nearby, and finally collapsed on the couch around 4 a.m. His phone buzzed. A text from Scarlett. Made it up okay. Thank you for the ride and for trusting me tonight. That meant more than you know. Ryan stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you for coming. You're right. We're friends. I need to start acting like it. The response came immediately. We both do. Get some sleep. Ryan set an alarm and closed his eyes, exhausted in a way that went beyond just physical tiredness. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. The next morning, Ryan called his supervisor to explain the situation. Before he could ask about taking time off, his supervisor cut him off. Already handled, the man said. Got a call this morning from corporate HR. You've got paid medical leave for the next week. Said it was some new emergency family care policy. Ryan closed his eyes. Let me guess. This policy was just implemented? Yeah, actually, yesterday. Weird timing, right? Yeah, weird. After hanging up, Ryan called Scarlett. She answered, sounding much more awake than she had any right to be. Did you create a new company policy just to give me paid leave? He asked. I created a company policy that gives all employees with sick children paid leave, Scarlett corrected. You're just the first person to benefit from it. That's not what I asked. Fine. Yes. I may have called the CEO of your company at 7 this morning and strongly suggested they implement better family medical leave policies. And I may have implied that Vail Industries would look unfavorably on any future contracts with companies that don't support working parents. Scarlett, before you get mad, just know that this policy is going to help hundreds of employees, not just you. You're not getting special treatment. You're just the reason I noticed the problem in the first place. Ryan didn't know what to say. She'd changed company policy to help him, but she'd done it in a way that helped everyone. It should have felt manipulative, but instead it just felt thoughtful. Thank you, he said finally. You're welcome. How's Chloe? Still sleeping. Fever's down, though. Good. Let me know if you need anything, and I mean anything. I will. He spent the next week taking care of Chloe, who milked the sick status for everything it was worth. Scarlett called every day to check in, sometimes stopping by with soup or books or movies she thought Chloe would like. She never stayed long, never made it feel like an intrusion, just showed up and proved she meant what she said about being there. By the time Chloe was well enough to go back to school, something had shifted between Ryan and Scarlett. The tension from the hospital parking lot had faded, replaced by something easier. They texted throughout the day about nothing important. She sent him articles about generator maintenance she thought were interesting. He sent her pictures of things Chloe drew. It felt normal in a way Ryan hadn't expected. 2 weeks after the hospital incident, Scarlett called with a different kind of question. Are you sitting down? She asked. Should I be? Probably. I have a proposition for you, and I need you to hear me out before you say no. Ryan sat down on his couch, immediately suspicious. What kind of proposition? Vail Industries just finalized the sale. I'm no longer CEO, no longer on the board, completely out of the company I built. I'm sorry, that must be hard. It's weird, Scarlett admitted, but also kind of freeing. Which brings me to why I'm calling. I've decided to start something new, a nonprofit organization focused on emergency infrastructure in underserved communities, backup power systems for hospitals, communication networks for disaster zones, that kind of thing. Real work that actually helps people instead of just making rich people richer. That sounds amazing. I want you to run it. Ryan almost dropped the phone. What? Not right away, Scarlett continued quickly. I know you'd need training, certifications, probably to finish your engineering degree, but I've been researching your field, and you have 10 years of hands-on experience that most engineers with fancy degrees don't have. You understand power systems in a practical way that matters. And more importantly, you understand what it means to be on the receiving end of infrastructure that fails when you need it most. Scarlett, I'm a technician. I fix generators. I don't run organizations. Neither did I when I started. I was a 20-year-old with a basic business degree and an idea. I figured it out. You can too. This is crazy. Probably. But will you at least think about it? Ryan's mind was racing. The salary she was probably talking about would change everything. Chloe could go to any school she wanted. They could move to a better neighborhood. He could stop choosing between paying rent and buying groceries. But it also meant accepting something so large from Scarlett that he'd never be able to repay it. It meant their relationship fundamentally shifting in a way he wasn't sure he was ready for. "What's the salary?" he asked, because he needed to know exactly how much he was turning down. Scarlett named a number that made Ryan's vision blur. It was more than triple what he made now, more than he'd ever imagined making in his life. "That's insane," he managed. "That's market rate for a director of operations at a nonprofit of this size. Actually, it's slightly below market rate, but I figured you'd argue if I went higher." "I need to think about this." "Of course, take all the time you need." After hanging up, Ryan sat staring at the wall for a long time. Chloe came home from school and found him still sitting there. "Dad? You okay?" "Yeah, baby, just thinking." "About what?" Ryan looked at his daughter, who was wearing a coat that was getting too small and shoes that would need replacing soon and carrying a backpack he'd bought at a thrift store. He thought about the opportunities he couldn't give her because money was always tight. The field trips he had to say no to, the after-school programs she'd asked about that they couldn't afford. Then he thought about accepting a job from someone he'd known for less than 2 months, no matter how much he'd come to care about her. About what it would mean if things went wrong between them. About whether he was making a smart decision or just desperately grasping at the first lifeline thrown his way. "Just some work stuff," he said finally. "Nothing for you to worry about." But over the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He researched Scarlett's idea, looked up similar organizations, tried to understand if this was a real opportunity or just something she'd invented to help him without making it obvious. Everything he found suggested it was legitimate. There was a genuine need for the kind of infrastructure work she was describing. Organizations already existed doing similar things, just not at the scale or with the funding Scarlett could provide. A week later, he called her back. "I have conditions," he said without preamble. "Okay." Scarlett sounded cautious but hopeful. "First, I need to earn this position, not just be handed it because we're friends. That means training, education, proving I can actually do the job." "Agreed." "Second, you don't get to give me special treatment. If I screw up, you call me on it. If I'm not qualified for something, you hire someone who is. This has to be professional." "Of course." "Third, we need clear boundaries between our personal relationship and work. I don't want Chloe to feel like our friendship is contingent on me taking this job." "I would never do that," Scarlett said, sounding hurt. "I know you wouldn't mean to, but things get complicated. I need to know that if this doesn't work out professionally, we're still okay personally." There was a pause. Then Scarlett said quietly, "Ryan, you and Chloe are my family, the only family I have left. Nothing about a job is going to change that. If you take this position and decide you hate it, if you quit on day one, if it's a complete disaster, you're still my family. That doesn't go away." Ryan felt his throat tighten. "You mean that?" "I've never meant anything more in my life." "Then okay, let's do this." He could hear Scarlett smile through the phone. "Yeah?" "Yeah, but I want to start slow. Part-time while I keep my current job, at least until I've completed whatever training I need. I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket until I know I can actually do this." "That's smart. We can work with that." Scarlett was clearly excited now. "I'll set up meetings with some engineers I know. Get you enrolled in the certification programs you'll need. Oh, and there's a conference next month on emergency power systems in developing countries. You should come with me." "Miss Scarlett, slow down. Let me tell my boss I'm leaving first." "Right, sorry. I'm just excited." "Me too," Ryan admitted, and terrified. "That's how you know it's worth doing." Ryan spent the next week giving notice at his current job, explaining to Chloe what was happening and trying to wrap his head around the fact that his life was about to change completely. His supervisor was disappointed to lose him, but understanding. His coworkers threw him a small goodbye party in the break room with cheap beer and a cake from the grocery store. "You're really doing it," his supervisor said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Moving up in the world." "Just trying something new," Ryan said, uncomfortable with the attention. "That Vale woman, she's the one who set this up?" "Yeah." "She your girlfriend?" Ryan almost choked on his beer. "No, just a friend." His supervisor gave him a knowing look. "Sure, friend. Well, good luck with your friend and her billion-dollar nonprofit." Ryan didn't bother correcting him. Let them think whatever they wanted. The truth was complicated enough without trying to explain it to people who wouldn't understand. His first day at the new job was terrifying. The office was in a renovated building downtown, all glass and modern design, with a staff of 12 people Scarlett had already hired. She introduced him to everyone, including the woman who would be his direct supervisor during the training period. A no-nonsense engineer named Patricia, who'd spent 20 years working on infrastructure projects in disaster zones. "Scarlett says you're good," Patricia told him after everyone else had left. "But I'm going to push you hard. This isn't a charity job. We're trying to build something real here. You okay with that?" "More than okay," Ryan said, meaning it. Patricia nodded. "Good. Let's get to work." The next 3 months were the hardest Ryan had worked in his life. Patricia wasn't kidding about pushing him. She threw technical manuals at him, sent him to training courses that made his brain hurt, had him shadow experienced engineers on project sites. Ryan studied at night after putting Chloe to bed, reading about power distribution systems and emergency protocols until his eyes crossed. Scarlett kept her distance professionally, which he appreciated. She checked in occasionally to see how he was adjusting, but she never interfered with Patricia's training regimen. At the office, she treated him like any other employee. But outside work, she was still the person who showed up to Chloe's school events, who texted him stupid jokes when he was stressed, who felt like family in a way that scared and comforted him in equal measure. One night, 3 months into his new position, Ryan was working late at the office, trying to understand a particularly complex section of electrical code. Everyone else had gone home. He was alone with a stack of textbooks and a growing headache when Scarlett appeared in his doorway. "You're going to burn out if you keep this up," she said. "I'm fine." "You're here at 9 p.m. reading about voltage regulation. That's not fine." Ryan rubbed his eyes. "I'm so far behind everyone else. Patricia knows things in her sleep that I'm just learning. I need to catch up." Scarlett walked in and sat down across from him. "You know what Patricia told me last week? That I'm hopeless? That you're the fastest learner she's ever trained. That you have an intuitive understanding of systems that takes most engineers years to develop. And that she's already planning to put you on the hospital project in Tanzania next quarter because she trusts you to handle it." Ryan stared at her. "She said that?" "Word for word. You're doing amazing, Ryan. You need to give yourself credit." "I just don't want to let you down." "You couldn't if you tried." Scarlett leaned forward. "You took a massive risk accepting this position. You're working your ass off to prove yourself, and you're succeeding. That's not letting anyone down. But if I fail, then you fail, and we figure out what comes next. But you're not going to fail." She smiled. "And even if you did, you'd still be family. Remember?" Ryan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Yeah, I remember." "Good. Now go home. Spend time with your daughter. The voltage regulation will still be here tomorrow." He packed up his books, and they walked out together. In the elevator, Scarlett spoke again. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about." "What's that?" "The Tanzania project. It's a 3-week trip to install backup power at a rural hospital. Patricia wants you to lead it." "Lead it? I'm still training." "Patricia thinks you're ready. So do I." Ryan's heart started racing. "That's a huge responsibility." "It is, and you can absolutely say no if you're not comfortable. But I've seen your work over the past few months. You're ready for this." They reached the parking garage. Ryan unlocked his truck, which ran better than ever thanks to the mechanic Scarlett had called months ago. "When would it be?" he asked. 6 weeks from now. You'd leave on a Wednesday, be back before Chloe's winter break." Ryan thought about his daughter, who'd been so excited about his new job, who'd started telling people her dad was going to help hospitals in other countries. She'd miss him for 3 weeks, but she'd also be proud of him. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." Scarlett's face lit up. "Really?" "Yeah. but I'm going to need Patricia's help planning everything. She's already started. Scarlett grinned. She was pretty confident you'd say yes. Ryan shook his head, but he was smiling. You all are way too sure about me. That's because we see what you don't. You're good at this, Ryan. Really good. You just need to believe it. As he drove home that night, Ryan thought about how much had changed in 6 months. He'd gone from a struggling mechanic who could barely pay rent to someone leading international infrastructure projects. He had a daughter who was thriving, friends who felt like family, and for the first time in years, a future that looked like something more than just survival. None of it felt real, but all of it was. And somewhere in the middle of accepting all of this, Ryan realized he'd stopped being angry at Scarlett for helping him. He'd stopped feeling like charity. Instead, he just felt grateful. Grateful that she'd sat at his table that night. Grateful that she'd seen something in him worth investing in. Grateful that she'd proven friends could show up and stay. He pulled into his parking spot and looked up at his apartment building. It was still the same tired 4-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was more worn than nice. But even that was changing. He'd already started looking at better places. Apartments where Chloe could have her own room, where the heat worked reliably, where he didn't have to worry about whether the front door lock would hold. Next month, they'd move. And the month after that, he'd get on a plane to Tanzania to do work that actually mattered. And somehow, impossibly, life was becoming something he'd stopped believing it could be. His phone buzzed. A text from Scarlett. Proud of you. Also, Chloe's birthday is coming up. What are we doing this year? Ryan smiled and typed back, whatever she wants, sky's the limit. The response came immediately. Dangerous words. I'm going to hold you to that. Ryan climbed the stairs to his apartment, feeling lighter than he had in years. Inside, Chloe was already asleep, a book open on her chest where she'd dozed off reading. He gently moved the book, pulled her blanket up, and kissed her forehead. We're doing okay, Em, he whispered into the quiet. Finally, we're doing okay. And for the first time since Emma died, Ryan felt like he wasn't lying to her. 1 year later, Ryan stood in the same elevator that had terrified him the first time and felt nothing but anticipation. Chloe was beside him, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself from a store they could actually afford now, her hair done up in braids she'd insisted on learning how to do from YouTube tutorials. She was 9 years old today, and she'd asked for only one thing, dinner at the restaurant where everything started. You sure about this? Ryan asked her as the elevator climbed. We could go anywhere else, somewhere new. I want to go here, Chloe said firmly. It's our place now. The elevator doors opened and Ryan saw immediately that she was right. The restaurant looked the same. Crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows, tables full of wealthy people eating expensive food. But it felt completely different. Or maybe Ryan was different. He was wearing a suit he'd bought himself, one that actually fit, from money he'd earned doing work that mattered. His hands were still rough from years of generator repair, but now they also knew how to draft emergency power plans for hospitals in countries he'd only read about before. The hostess recognized him immediately, which would have been unthinkable a year ago. Mr. Mercer, she said warmly, your table is ready. Ms. Vale is already here. They followed her through the restaurant, past tables where people glanced up with mild curiosity instead of the barely concealed judgment Ryan remembered from before. He spotted Scarlett near the windows at a table for 3, and something in his chest tightened. She'd changed too. Not dramatically. She was still elegant and polished in a way Ryan would never quite manage, but there was something softer about her now. She smiled when she saw them, a real smile that reached her eyes, and stood to hug Chloe. Happy birthday, Scarlett said, pressing a small wrapped box into Chloe's hands. But you have to wait until after dinner to open it. Is it a pony? Chloe asked hopefully. It's not a pony. Could you buy me a pony if I asked? Probably, but your dad would kill me. Accurate, Ryan confirmed, sitting down. The same waiter from a year ago, Laurent, appeared with menus and barely concealed delight. Over the past year, Ryan and Chloe had become semi-regular visitors, usually when Scarlett insisted on celebrating something. Chloe's school achievements, Ryan completing his certifications, successful project launches. The staff had learned to treat them like any other guests, which was exactly what Ryan wanted. The usual? Laurent asked. Actually, Chloe said, studying the menu with exaggerated seriousness. I want to try the fancy thing. The one with the French name I can't say. Coq au vin? Laurent suggested. That one. After they ordered, Scarlett leaned back and looked at them both with an expression Ryan had learned to recognize. She was cataloging memories, storing this moment away like she was afraid it might disappear. What? He asked. Nothing. Just thinking about how much has changed since the last birthday we celebrated here. Everything's changed, Chloe agreed. Dad has a real job now. We have a new apartment with 2 bathrooms, and you're not sad all the time anymore. Scarlett laughed. I wasn't sad all the time. Yes, you were, Chloe said matter-of-factly. But you're better now. You smile more, and you tell jokes that are actually funny instead of the weird ones adults tell when they're pretending to be happy. Ryan tried to hide his smile. Chloe had inherited Emma's brutal honesty, a trait that made her either incredibly insightful or deeply embarrassing depending on the situation. You're right, Scarlett admitted. I am better, because of you two. And therapy, Chloe added. You told me therapy helped a lot. That too. Ryan watched them interact with the easy familiarity of family. Somewhere over the past year, Scarlett had become a permanent fixture in their lives. She came to Chloe's soccer games, helped with homework when Ryan was traveling for work, showed up for dinner at their new apartment at least twice a week, with takeout and stories about whatever crisis was currently unfolding at the nonprofit. She was there for the mundane moments and the important ones, proving over and over that she'd meant what she said about not leaving. How was Tanzania? Scarlett asked Ryan. He'd gotten back 2 days ago from his 3rd trip to the rural hospital project. Good. The backup system is fully operational now. They've already had 2 power outages where it kicked in automatically. Probably saved lives. Definitely saved lives, Scarlett corrected. Ryan still struggled with that part, accepting that his work had real impact. But he was learning. Patricia had drilled into him that false modesty didn't serve anyone. If you did good work, you acknowledged it and used that confidence to do more good work. The hospital administrator asked if we'd consider expanding to 2 other facilities in the region, Ryan continued. Similar infrastructure problems, same need for reliable backup power. What did you tell him? That I'd discuss it with my boss and get back to him. Scarlett grinned. Your boss says yes. Draft a proposal, and we'll make it happen. This was how their professional relationship had evolved. Scarlett trusted Ryan's judgment completely, to the point where he sometimes forgot she was technically his employer. They argued about project priorities, disagreed about timelines, pushed back on each other's ideas. It was exactly what Ryan had wanted, a real working partnership, not charity dressed up as a job. Their food arrived and they ate while Chloe told them about school, about her friend Maya, who'd moved away but still video called every week, about the science project she was planning that involved growing plants in different types of soil. She was thriving in ways Ryan hadn't thought possible a year ago. The new school was better, the neighborhood was safer, and she had the kind of stability kids needed to just be kids instead of worrying about adult problems. Can I ask you something? Chloe said suddenly, looking at Scarlett with the serious expression that always preceded profound or devastating questions. Sure, Scarlett said carefully. Are you going to marry my dad? Ryan choked on his water. Laurent, who'd been refilling glasses, froze mid-pour. Scarlett's eyes went wide. Chloe, Ryan managed once he could breathe. That's not appropriate. Why not? Maya's mom asked me the same thing last week. She said you two act like a married couple. We're friends, Ryan said firmly. Good friends, that's all. Chloe looked between them with the skepticism of someone who'd watched too many movies where the characters denied their feelings until the dramatic ending. Okay, but if you ever wanted to get married, I'd be okay with it, just so you know. Noted, Scarlett said, her voice slightly strangled. Thank you for that permission. An awkward silence settled over the table. Ryan could feel heat creeping up his neck. In a year of friendship, they'd never discussed the fact that sometimes, especially lately, the line between friendship and something else felt blurry. They'd never addressed the way Scarlett's hand would rest on his shoulder a beat too long, or how Ryan's pulse would quicken when she walked into a room, or the fact that they talked every single day and neither of them seemed to find that excessive. Laurent saved them by returning with dessert, an elaborate chocolate creation with sparklers that made Chloe forget all about her previous line of questioning. She made a wish and blew them out, while other diners watched and smiled. "What did you wish for?" Scarlett asked. "Can't tell, or it won't come true," Chloe said seriously. "But it was good." After dessert, Scarlett pulled out her gift. Chloe tore into the wrapping to find a beautiful leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "For your writing," Scarlett explained, "your dad told me you've been working on stories." "They're not very good," Chloe said, but she was already flipping through the blank pages with reverence. "They don't have to be good. They just have to be yours." Chloe threw her arms around Scarlett's neck. "Thank you. This is perfect." Ryan watched them and felt an ache in his chest that wasn't quite pain. Emma should have been here for this. Should have seen their daughter growing up confident and happy. Should have been the one giving thoughtful gifts and celebrating birthdays. But Emma wasn't here, and Scarlett was, and life had handed them this strange second chance at family that none of them had been looking for. After dinner, they walked out together into the Chicago night. The city sparkled below them, bright and loud and full of possibilities. Ryan's truck was in the same parking lot where it had broken down a year ago, but this time it started immediately. "Can Scarlett come over?" Chloe asked as Ryan buckled her in. "It's late, baby. She probably has things to do." "I don't, actually," Scarlett said. "I'd love to come over if that's okay." So they drove to the apartment Ryan and Chloe had moved into 6 months ago. It was in a better neighborhood, with actual heat and working plumbing, and neighbors who weren't dealing drugs in the stairwell. Chloe had her own room, decorated with posters and books and the accumulated treasures of childhood. Ryan had a real bedroom instead of the couch. The kitchen had appliances that all functioned. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Chloe showed Scarlett her room, proudly displaying the changes since Scarlett's last visit. New curtains, a bookshelf Ryan had built himself, drawings covering one entire wall. Then she changed into pajamas and insisted Scarlett read her a bedtime story from one of the books she'd been given for her birthday. Ryan stood in the doorway, watching Scarlett sit on the edge of Chloe's bed, reading with funny voices that made his daughter giggle. This had become routine over the past year, Scarlett folding herself seamlessly into their lives, being present without being intrusive, loving Chloe in a way that felt natural and right. When Chloe finally fell asleep, Scarlett carefully extracted herself and followed Ryan to the living room. He offered her coffee, which she accepted, and they sat on the couch that was actually comfortable instead of the torture device from the old apartment. "She really loves you," Ryan said. "I love her too." Scarlett wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "Both of you, you know that, right?" "Yeah, I know." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Scarlett spoke again, her voice quiet. "Can we talk about what Chloe asked at dinner?" Ryan's stomach dropped. "We don't have to." "I think we do, because she's not entirely wrong." Ryan looked at her. Scarlett was staring into her coffee like it might have answers written in the foam. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. "I mean that somewhere in the past year my feelings have gotten complicated, and I've been ignoring them because I didn't want to mess up what we have. But after tonight, after watching you both and realizing how much you mean to me, I think I need to be honest." Ryan's heart was pounding. "Honest about what?" Scarlett finally looked up at him. "I'm in love with you, and I have been for months, maybe longer. I don't know when it happened exactly, but at some point, you stopped being my friend who I wanted to help and became the person I couldn't imagine my life without." Ryan couldn't breathe. He'd wondered. Late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he'd let himself think about the possibility that maybe Scarlett felt the same pull he did. But he'd always convinced himself he was wrong, that she was just being kind, that a billionaire nonprofit founder would never actually fall for a former mechanic with a kid and a traumatic past. "Say something," Scarlett said, and he could hear fear in her voice. "I don't know what to say." "You could start with whether the feeling is mutual, or if I just completely destroyed our friendship with this confession." Ryan set down his coffee cup. "When I came back from Tanzania last month, the first person I wanted to tell about the trip was you. Not because you're my boss, but because you're the only person who really understands why that work matters to me. And when Chloe won her science fair, my first thought was to call you, even before I called anyone else. And when I wake up in the morning, I check my phone hoping you've already texted. So? Scarlett's voice was barely a whisper. So yeah, the feeling is mutual, very mutual. I just didn't think I had the right to feel this way about you. Why not? Because you're you and I'm me. Because you've given me so much already that wanting more feels greedy. Because the last time I loved someone, I lost her, and I'm terrified of going through that again. Scarlett set down her own mug and moved closer. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. Neither of us can. But I can promise that I'm not going anywhere by choice. You and Chloe, you're my family. You're what I want to wake up to every morning, and I'm tired of pretending that's not what this is. Ryan felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked down tight since Emma died. I'm tired of pretending too. So what do we do about it? I have no idea. I haven't done this in 12 years. I don't remember how to date. And with Chloe involved, everything gets more complicated. Then we figure it out together, like we've figured everything else out. Scarlett reached for his hand. We can go slow. We don't have to change anything right away. Just acknowledge that this is more than friendship and see where it goes. Ryan looked at their joined hands and felt terror and hope in equal measure. Okay, but we need rules. What kind of rules? Chloe comes first, always. If this doesn't work out, we don't let it affect her. We stay friends for her sake no matter what. Agreed. What else? We're honest with each other, about everything. No hiding feelings to avoid conflict. That works both ways. You have to tell me when I'm being overbearing or when my money makes you uncomfortable. And you have to tell me when I'm being stubborn or when my pride is getting in the way. Scarlett smiled. Deal. Any other rules? Ryan thought about it. Just one. We don't rush this. We've built something really good here. I don't want to mess it up by moving too fast. Slow works for me. They sat there holding hands, both terrified and excited about what this meant. After a while, Scarlett leaned her head on Ryan's shoulder. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Do you think Emma would be okay with this? With us? It was the question Ryan had been avoiding asking himself. He thought about his wife, who'd loved generously and believed in second chances, who'd always told him that life was too short to let fear make decisions. Yeah, he said finally. I think she'd tell me I was an idiot for waiting so long, and she'd probably love you for taking care of us. I hope so. I'd like to think she'd approve. She would. Ryan squeezed Scarlett's hand. She really would. They stayed on the couch talking until after midnight, figuring out what this new phase of their relationship might look like. They decided not to tell Chloe anything yet, not until they were sure this was going somewhere. They'd keep things professional at work, keep their personal lives separate from business decisions. They'd take it day by day and see what developed. When Scarlett finally left, Ryan walked her to her car. At the door, she turned to face him. Thank you, she said, for taking a chance on this, on us. Thank you for being patient with me, for understanding that I needed time. I would have waited forever if that's what it took. Ryan leaned in slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, both of them hyper-aware that this moment changed everything. When they pulled apart, Scarlett was smiling. That was worth waiting for, she said. Yeah, it really was. Ryan watched her drive away, then went back inside to check on Chloe. She was still sleeping peacefully, her new journal on the nightstand beside her. He kissed her forehead and whispered the same thing he'd been saying for 3 years. We're doing okay, Em. Better than okay. We're actually happy. And this time, he didn't feel guilty saying it. The next 6 months were an exercise in learning how to build something new while honoring what came before. Ryan and Scarlett dated in the way two people with full lives and complicated histories dated. Stolen moments between work obligations, late-night phone calls when they couldn't sleep, dinners where they talked about everything and nothing. They kept it from Chloe initially, not out of shame but out of caution, wanting to be sure before they introduced this new dynamic. But kids weren't stupid, and Chloe figured it out within 3 weeks. You're dating, she announced one morning over breakfast, looking at Ryan with the expression of someone who'd solved a particularly satisfying mystery. What makes you say that? Ryan asked, trying to sound casual. You keep texting and smiling at your phone. And last week when Scarlett came over, you held hands when you thought I wasn't looking. And you both get weird when I talk about relationships. Ryan set down his coffee. Okay, yeah, we're dating. How do you feel about that? Chloe shrugged. I already told you I'd be okay with it. I like Scarlett. She makes you happy, and she makes me happy, so why wouldn't I want you to date? It's not that simple, baby. Dating someone when you have a kid means the kid gets affected too. If things don't work out, they'll work out, Chloe interrupted with the absolute certainty of childhood. You're both too stubborn to quit once you decide to do something. You'll figure it out. Ryan hoped she was right. Over the following months, they built a new kind of normal. Scarlett came over more often, stayed later, became part of their daily routine in a way that felt right. They had their first fight, about money, inevitably, and learned how to work through conflict without destroying what they'd built. They celebrated holidays together, including Thanksgiving, where Scarlett insisted on cooking and nearly set Ryan's kitchen on fire trying to make stuffing. I built a billion-dollar company, but I can't figure out how to cook a turkey, she'd said, staring at the smoke detector she'd triggered. Different skill sets, Ryan had assured her, taking over kitchen duties while Scarlett and Chloe set the table. Work continued to grow. The nonprofit expanded to 12 countries, providing emergency infrastructure to communities that desperately needed it. Ryan led more projects, hired talented engineers, built systems that saved lives in ways he'd never imagined possible when he was fixing generators at 3 a.m. Patricia promoted him to senior director, which came with more responsibility and more stress and more satisfaction than anything he'd done before. And through all of it, Scarlett was there, not as his boss, but as his partner. They kept work and personal life separate in the ways that mattered, but they also supported each other in ways that made both aspects of life better. She understood why a project failure could ruin his week. He understood why board meetings left her drained and frustrated. They held each other up when things got hard and celebrated together when things went right. Chloe thrived in ways that made Ryan's chest ache with gratitude. She made friends easily at her new school, excelled in her classes, developed interests and hobbies and dreams that had nothing to do with surviving and everything to do with living. She talked about becoming an engineer like her dad, or maybe a writer, or possibly a veterinarian. The point was, she had options now, possibilities, a future that wasn't limited by poverty and trauma. One evening, about 8 months after that second birthday dinner, Ryan was helping Chloe with homework when she asked a question that stopped him cold. Dad, is it okay if I start thinking of Scarlett as my mom? Ryan's pen froze mid-word. What? I know she's not my real mom. My real mom died and I still remember her, but Scarlett does mom things. She comes to my school stuff and helps with homework and makes sure I eat vegetables. And I love her like I think I'd love a mom if I had one. Ryan's throat tightened. What brought this on? Maya asked me if Scarlett was my stepmom, and I didn't know what to say. Because you're not married, but she kind of feels like a mom anyway. Is that wrong? No, baby, that's not wrong at all. Ryan pulled Chloe into a hug. Your real mom would want you to have people who love you in your life. She wouldn't want you to be alone just because she's not here anymore. So it's okay? It's more than okay, but maybe you should talk to Scarlett about it, see how she feels. Will she be mad? I don't think she could ever be mad about you wanting her in your life. That weekend, Chloe brought it up to Scarlett directly, with the same blunt honesty she approached everything. They were at the park, watching kids play on the playground, when Chloe just turned to Scarlett and said, Can I call you Mom? Scarlett's eyes filled with tears immediately. You want to call me Mom? If it's okay. You don't have to say yes. I just thought maybe since you do mom things and I love you, it would make sense. Scarlett pulled Chloe into a fierce hug. It would be the greatest honor of my life if you called me Mom. Even though I had a different mom first? Especially because of that. Your first mom sounds like she was incredible. I'm not trying to replace her. I just want to be another person who loves you as much as she did. Okay then. Chloe said it simply, like they'd just agreed on what to have for lunch instead of fundamentally reshaping their family structure. I'm going to go play now. Thanks, Mom. She ran off toward the swings, leaving Scarlett crying on the park bench. Ryan sat down beside her and pulled her close. You okay? He asked. I never thought I'd get this, Scarlett said through tears. A family, a daughter, someone who wants me in their life not because of my money, but just because of who I am. I didn't think I deserved it after spending so long being angry at the world. Well, you deserve all of it, and more. They sat there watching Chloe play, both thinking about how far they'd come from that first night in the restaurant. Two broken people who'd found each other by accident and built something neither of them could have imagined. A year and a half after that initial birthday dinner, Ryan proposed to Scarlett in the same restaurant where everything began. He'd planned something elaborate, a speech about second chances and chosen family and learning to accept help. But when the moment came, with Chloe sitting beside them wearing a dress she'd picked out specifically for this occasion, Ryan found he couldn't remember any of the words he'd practiced. "Marry me," he said simply, pulling out a ring he'd saved for months to buy. "Not because I need you to rescue me or because I think I owe you anything, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love doesn't have to end in tragedy." Scarlett was crying before he'd finished. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Chloe cheered loud enough that the entire restaurant turned to look. Ryan slipped the ring on Scarlett's finger. Nothing extravagant, because she'd told him she didn't want anything that would make him uncomfortable, just something simple and meaningful, and kissed her while their daughter applauded. "About time," Chloe declared. "I was starting to think I'd have to plan the proposal myself." They got married 4 months later in a small ceremony that reflected who they actually were instead of who people expected them to be. Just close friends, colleagues, Chloe as the flower girl wearing a dress she'd helped design. No elaborate production, no society pages, just two people promising to love each other through whatever came next. Emma's picture sat on a table near the altar because she was part of this story too. She'd loved Ryan first, had given him Chloe, had shaped the man who could eventually open his heart again. And next to Emma's picture was one of Scarlett's brother, because he'd shaped her too, had made her into someone who understood loss and tried to build something meaningful from it. At the reception, Chloe gave a speech that made everyone cry. "My dad used to tell me that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things if we're brave enough to keep going," she said, reading from cards she'd written herself. "My first mom dying was the worst thing. But it led to my dad taking me to that fancy restaurant, which led to meeting Scarlett, which led to all of this. So I guess what I'm saying is that being brave enough to be sad and being brave enough to be happy again are the same kind of brave. And I'm really glad my dad and my new mom were both brave enough to let each other in." The speech was surprisingly wise for a 10-year-old, but Chloe had grown up learning hard lessons early. She understood that life wasn't fair, that people you loved could disappear without warning, but also that joy could sneak in through unexpected doors if you didn't lock them all. Ryan and Scarlett's first dance was to a song Emma had loved because they both agreed she should be part of this celebration. When it ended, Scarlett pulled Chloe onto the floor and they danced together, mother and daughter, and Ryan watched his family with a fullness in his chest he'd thought he'd never feel again. Later that night, after the wedding was over and Chloe was asleep at Scarlett's parents' friend's house for the weekend, Ryan and Scarlett sat on the balcony of their hotel room overlooking the city. "We did it," Scarlett said, leaning against him. "Did what?" "Built something real, something that matters, not just the nonprofit or the work we do, but this, us, a family that chose each other." Ryan thought about everything that had led to this moment. The birthday dinner that bankrupted him, the broken-down truck, the hospital emergency, the job offer he'd almost refused out of pride, all the small moments of letting someone help him, of accepting that needing people wasn't weakness. "You know what I think the hardest part was?" he said. "What?" "Learning that accepting help doesn't make you less, that letting someone care about you isn't giving up independence. I spent so long thinking I had to handle everything alone that I almost missed the best thing that ever happened to me." "I had to learn that too," Scarlett admitted, "that giving help isn't about power or control, that sometimes people need you not because you're rich, but because you care. That being vulnerable enough to love someone again is the bravest thing you can do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights spread out below them. Somewhere out there was the restaurant where this all started, the parking lot where Ryan's truck had broken down, the hospital where Scarlett had made calls that got Chloe immediate care, all the places that had seemed like endings but turned out to be beginnings. Do you think they'd be proud of us? Ryan asked. Emma and your brother? I think they'd be relieved, Scarlett said, that we found each other, that we stopped being so alone. Yeah, I think you're right. The truth was that grief didn't go away just because you found happiness again. Emma was still gone. Scarlett's brother was still gone. Those losses would always be part of who they were. But they'd learned something important. You could honor the people you'd lost by building a life they would have wanted for you. By loving again. By being brave enough to stay open to possibility, even when the world had proven how quickly everything could fall apart. Ryan thought about that first night, standing in the elevator terrified he didn't belong. He'd been right to be scared, not because rich people's restaurants were inherently intimidating, but because opening yourself up to connection always carried risk. You could be hurt, disappointed, left behind. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was spending your life so focused on survival that you forgot to actually live. He pulled Scarlett closer. She fit against him perfectly, like she'd been designed specifically for this purpose. Like maybe the universe, which had taken so much from both of them, had finally decided to give something back. I love you, he said. I love you too. Even though I'm terrible at accepting help, especially because of that. It means when you do accept help, I know you really need it. And I love you even though you're terrible at cooking, Scarlett laughed. We can't all be perfect. Good thing perfect is overrated. They stayed on that balcony until early morning, talking about plans for their honeymoon, about projects they wanted to launch, about Chloe's upcoming school year, and whether they should think about giving her a sibling eventually. They talked about the nonprofit expanding to 20 countries, about Ryan maybe writing a book about infrastructure in developing nations, about Scarlett potentially teaching at the university level. But mostly they just enjoyed being together. These two people who'd found each other in a fancy restaurant neither of them had really wanted to be in, who'd built friendship into family, who'd turned tragedy into purpose, who'd learned that the best things in life usually came from the moments when you were brave enough to say yes to help, to connection, to love. The sun started rising over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ryan thought about all the mornings he'd watched the sunrise alone, wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. And here he was, married to someone who understood his broken pieces because she had matching ones of her own, raising a daughter who was thriving, doing work that actually mattered. What are you thinking? Scarlett asked. That I'm really glad my truck broke down that night. She laughed. That's what you're thinking about on our wedding night? I'm thinking that every hard thing led here, that maybe we needed to break down completely before we could build something better. That's very philosophical for 6 in the morning. I'm a man of hidden depths. You really are. They watched the sunrise together, neither wanting to go inside and end this perfect moment. Eventually, they'd have to return to real life, to work obligations and parenting responsibilities and all the mundane tasks that made up a life. But for now, they just existed in this space between night and day, between past and future, between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Somewhere in the city below them, another family was probably having their own crisis, their own moment of breaking down. Ryan hoped they'd be lucky enough to find someone willing to sit at their table uninvited, someone brave enough to help, someone who understood that the strongest families weren't the ones who never struggled, but the ones who struggled together and came out stronger on the other side. Because that was the real lesson, Ryan had learned. Not that you should accept help because you're weak, but that accepting help was how you became strong. Not that you had to have all the answers, but that asking questions was how you found them. Not that love would fix everything, but that love made everything worth fixing. He'd entered that restaurant 18 months ago, ashamed of who he was, desperate to give his daughter one perfect memory. And he'd left with something so much bigger than one perfect night. He'd left with the beginning of a new life, though he hadn't known it at the time. Now, watching the sunrise with his wife while their daughter slept peacefully miles away, Ryan understood something fundamental about happiness. It didn't come from never falling apart. It came from finding people who'd help you put the pieces back together in new and better configurations. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those people became your family.